Oh my god. I said I was gonna keep Dean Aston for like a couple weeks, and here I am. Like, this is what? Maybe the.
This is your name now.
I miss Simp, to be honest.
Let's
Let's fix that right now.
He doesn't need to have it stamped on his forehead. He knows what he is. We know what he is.
Okay.
Don't talk to me like I'm a child, Gabe.
Gabe, have you considered how satisfying it is to be able to type in @simp in chat and have it notify Dean?
It is a very good point. Dean, change your name right now.
I'm working on it. Hold on, I need to
change your name right now.
I'm working on it.
Change your name right now, you little piss bitch. Change it back right now. You dumb stupid.
The down arrow.
So, did you get a degradation kink since we last talked? Because they're being real mean to you.
I don't buy it. Just go to fucking therapy.
If I develop Sims, delete the channel.
Fuck capitalism. We need to start a revolution.
And you know what? I'm gonna say it. I can't replace a fire alarm on my own. Technically, 25 is technically you.
Sing your morning routine.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Tonight, we have a lot of people joining us. So, Alex?
Hello.
Gabe?
Hello.
Brooke?
Hey.
Marie-Soleil?
Hello.
Charbel?
Hello.
Marcus?
Can I get a number 3 at supersized, a number 7, hello everyone.
I'm gonna clip that and bring that to a drive-through and see if that works. And returning for after his debut last season, Tyler.
Bonjour.
Tonight we are talking about villains. It is going to be a very long session because we have a lot of people to get through, but I figured I might as well give a breakdown of how tonight will work for those listening. We're splitting the episode into parts. So the first part, we're going to be talking about what makes a villain. That'll be a very general discussion between all 8 of us, just to kind of see how we kind of each describe a villain. Part 2 will then be going into specific case studies where we will each take turns probably applying what we've discussed from part 1, or maybe just, talking about a really good villain, a really bad villain. With that being said, because tonight is going to be a long episode, we will not be doing a check-in. We will also not be doing a mid-episode segment, as that will just be reserved for a later discussion or a later episode. But I think with all of that out of the way, let's just get into the discussion with part 1. Guys, what makes a villain?
We have 2 girls in the chat. I'd like you to rephrase that, simp.
Sorry, everybody. What makes a villain?
I also don't have a body. I'm incorporeal. Can you rephrase that again?
All sentient beings. What makes a villain?
I'm actually a rock. How dare you?
I hate you. I hate all of you.
So, in my opinion, what makes a good villain is a differentiation between what is a villain and an antagonist. An antagonist is what goes against your protagonist, whereas a villain, in my mind, goes against the general society, or at least generally selected principles of said society.
This man's voice is so nice.
Oh, yeah. It can get nicer.
Daddy, please stop.
What's
Continue,
the safe
please.
word? Remember the safe word.
Oh my god. Guys, please.
No, we don't need the safe word, so let's Marcus.
And so that's where I do differentiate between what's an antagonist and a villain. And I'll be honest, in looking for case studies on this, I found myself classifying way more things as antagonists that I initially thought were villains, though both can be lumped together.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same issue, actually. Like I was looking at like a bunch of like people's favorite villain lists and stuff, and I was just like, half of these aren't even really villains; they're just antagonists.
Mm-hmm. And I
They're
think
not
like
the same thing.
they're not, yeah, but to me at least, I've always kind of like it's only recently that I've been kind of differentiating the two really and kind of defining what each of them could be. So, for me at least, and this is probably just reiterating, but this is how I've always come to understand it. Villains, at least like Tyler has said, has been a very pretty general thing. So like if they're a world-ending threat or like a massive government, those are obviously villains. But if it is a protagonist versus an antagonist with like if it is a very complex antagonist that they're doing, I almost feel as if that is not just a villain anymore. Like obviously they are what the protagonist doesn't represent, but it's more complex than that when it comes to the antagonist relationship, I think. And let's actually touch on that actually. So when it comes to villains versus antagonists, what does everyone else think?
Fuck. You guys brought up a good point. I didn't even think of it that way. I think I'm trying to think now as an antagonist, it's definitely someone going against the fucking protagonist. But like you guys said, if you let's say like you had like a high school drama and the antagonist is some other chick that's bullying the main character or whatever, the other chick isn't technically a villain and she's not destroying all of society or civilization. But like, fuck, as a villain, definitely, I have to say that it's someone with like, they might not directly be going against the main protagonist, but they could be just going either against some other character or the greater whole of the society or the structure or whatever.
Would you say then that probably a lot of antagonists start off as villains? Because to like in my head, it kind of thinks like, you know, the villain has his own agenda, and then suddenly once the protagonist gets involved, and then then that villain becomes the antagonist.
I think so, yeah. So you could have, there's obviously a bunch of stories where the villain's in the background and the protagonist doesn't even know what's going on up until the point where the protagonist realize the villain's existent, then the villain switches over to antagonist, you know? Mm-hmm. Because you could also have a protagonist who's fighting with some other guy and they may not be the main villain, they might be like a henchman or whatever. So that's a whole nother scenario where now that henchman is the antagonist because he's fighting the protagonist, but the main villain could be the big boss guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like when you're, or how we're kind of phrasing it, when you're classified as an antagonist, it's a more personal relationship. I'll call on someone actually to elaborate on this. Marcus, what do you think on that?
Yeah, let me mention this real quick. Yo, when Charbel was doing that example about school drama, I immediately thought of like Sharpay from High School Musical, and she's like, "I'm not gonna get the main role. I'm going to commit mass genocide."
Sharpay, she fucking shoots lightning out of her fingertips. We're like, what is going on here?
Anywho, when I think of antagonist, I think more so in the case of rival rather than just person who wants to destroy the world or commit acts of treason. I don't really know what else to say.
What's wrong with treason now?
Depends on the type of treason.
True.
Fair enough. Brooke, what about the personal antagonist relationship? What do you think on that?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm very muddled in my brain now about this. I'm just trying to think about all the movies and like what I'd classify as a villain versus an antagonist now. It's really throwing me off. So I don't really know.
Fair enough. Is there kind of like, without touching into our case studies yet, is there kind of one that kind of comes to mind?
Well, unfortunately, the first thing that came to my mind, mostly because I was staring at the stack of movies, was Thor Ragnarok having fucking shit.
Oh yeah.
That's
Oh
pretty,
yeah.
yeah,
What's
that's
his
pretty
name?
much it.
No, having Hela, but also having
Loki?
no big guy, big man, sword planet penetrate.
Surtur?
What?
Thanos.
Surtur.
Surtur.
Surtur. Having I'm like technically those are both villains in a story, but like obviously Surtur is not like the big bad. So is he still a villain, or is he just a force of opposition? Or is he a force of opportunity because they do use him to their advantage in the end?
Yeah.
Thanos.
I think like when it comes to secondary antagonists or secondary villains too, like there probably isn't a lot of, or I guess I'll open this up for discussion actually. When it comes to secondary villains, because they're pretty much secondary, there isn't really too much depth with them. Debt. They could be in a lot of debt. I don't know.
Maybe he has a lot of debt. That's why he's-
Yeah, he could be in a lot of debt, and he's just evil because he needs to pay off his loans. But like, what I'm kind of getting at is that when it comes, because there is a big bad from the start, really, secondary villains either don't have as much backstory, don't have as much like elaboration on their character as much as the as much as main antagonists do, because obviously that is the main antagonist is obviously the is the one that the protagonist will be facing and defeating eventually. But when it comes to secondary villains and antagonists or antagonists, what's everyone's take on that?
They're mostly like footstones, honestly. Like the little mini villains on the way to the main story is like to make the protagonist either learn a lesson or get stronger or some shit like that. Or they're just a pathway to the main villain. That's what I kind of found. And sometimes I end up liking the little villains more than the actual main ones sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Tyler, go ahead.
I do like secondary or minor villains quite a bit, and I like them especially in the trope that after you defeat them, they kind of turn tail and join the hero to some extent. It's a very common thing that happens in various video game genres, in anime, Supernatural. Did I just hear? Apparently they do it a lot in Supernatural. I don't know. I was just watching it for that hot Dean.
Fair enough.
Understandable.
100% fair.
Facts. No printer.
The most blatant example of this, and it's going to be really surprising to everyone that I know this, is My Little Pony. Because friendship is magic, and every time they beat a villain, it becomes their friend.
Shout out to the Sun and the Moon sisters. Y'all doing great.
How do you know that?
They have names, excuse me?
Shout out to Celestia and Luna.
There we go.
Of all the people in this chat, you're somehow the person I most expected to be familiar with My Little Pony lore.
I've recently introduced Marie-Soleil to it, and she's loving it, yeah.
So I think on secondary antagonists, Tyler, like you were, I kind of like paid attention to what you were saying, and through video games, that's definitely the case with a lot of them. Through video games, we have mini bosses, and mini bosses tend to either be serving the main antagonist or kind of just there along the way. To touch on, or to get Gabe's opinion on this, because there's a game that I want him to kind of scream about again. What are the secondary antagonist, or like the secondary villains / mini bosses like in Nier Automata?
Oh, you want me to talk about Nier Automata, huh?
Just make sure you control yourself. This is an evil laugh, everybody.
Okay. So like a lot of the, I think I was gonna say this earlier, but my computer was fucking up. I think like mini bosses and like smaller villains who just pop up like intermittently, they can sometimes be better than the main villains because like they have a lot more opportunities for like like really small moments of depth, and like you have a really limited time span with them, so you kind of have to get a lot out of the way much faster, and you have like so with like the best examples of this, you can sort of just like funnel in a lot of like character development and like really quick backstory with these villains, and like you don't have a lot of time to mull over it, so it doesn't have like a lot of the problems that happen with like the bigger villains where like their problems have to be super complex, because they don't have to be super complex, they just have to be enough to be interesting. So there's a bunch of villains, there's a bunch of mini bosses in Nier Automata. Basically all like the way Nier Automata is structured is that you have to like go to these various machine settlements and sort of explore these like sort of micro cultures that the machines have built in the wake of the like post apocalypse. Nier Automata is weird. But and basically, so they're all very throughout like the first playthrough of the game, they're all kind of interesting, and it's only when you do the second playthrough of the game that you start to get like a lot more exploration on like the these mini bosses, that like a lot of their big moments of depth start to come out. Like there's this one that I come back to. I went to when I don't even remember which episode we were talking about this on, but there's this one boss in Nier Automata called Simone.
Oh yeah, I remember
and Simone's
that.
Yeah, she's a very famous like boss in this game. She's like the one that people talk about when they want to talk about a Nier Automata boss. But basically, Simone's whole thing is that she's a combat machine that was basically built to be like to strive for like ever evolving sets of combat. So it's constantly building on itself, and it's constantly like adding new parts to itself. But something went fucky in the code, and basically the way that Simone as a character understands this is that she's like trying to attain beauty, and she's trying to like become more beautiful, and like the way that her way of doing combat sort of evolved is that it sort of became like almost a dance. And the way that her boss fight plays out is that you're basically in a room surrounded by a bunch of dead androids who have come to kill her before and who've all died, and you have this boss fight that's sort of like a boss fight / rhythm game section where you have to sort of
excuse me.
It's insane. Yoko Taro likes fucking around with rhythm game mechanics. This isn't like as much rhythm gamey as Drakengard, which is like full rhythm game, but this is like it's like a hack and slash section where the enemies' movements are sort of synced up to the musical beats of the song that's playing in the background, and has like
that's cool as hell though. I'm into that.
Yeah,
it's fucking wild. Like there's like when certain notes play, like certain attacks come, and you have to, as you basically play out the level, you have to sort of give Simone what she's always wanted, what she's killed a bunch of androids to try to get, which is have this dance with someone. She wants to just dance with people, and she kills people by dancing with them.
That's
so
sick.
it's this,
yeah, that's really sick,
it's this awesome, like kind of tragic but very like small moment in this game. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like that in Nier Automata. There's a bunch of like different enemies who all have different histories, and like the main villains of Nier Automata are like admittedly the game's weakest link. But
can I touch on that actually? So I'll let you finish up, but basically, or yeah, just finish up with what you were saying.
No, yeah. So basically, like you have all these sections with all these different bosses who are they all have these really weird pasts, like involving the big alien war and the big apocalyptic conflict that came before the alien war, and you have like all these different characters with different histories, like what they are plays into their boss fight in unique ways. And like this, because of the fact that it's so small and so tiny, like they really have to be gems. So like with a main villain, you can sort of have a main villain and have like their motivations and stuff, and it sort of goes over the whole story. But like with these tiny smaller villains, like when they work, they can really work because they have to be like these just like microcosms of what makes the storytelling work. Right. Is essentially what I'm trying to say. Right.
Yeah. I think so what I wanted to touch on actually was how different mediums write villains before we get to our case studies. And while we're still talking about video games, there's one that I wanted to bring up, which is God of War. I've talked about this game plenty before, but basically, the main
I love God of War.
Yeah, so the main villain of Charbel, I'm talking about God of War 2018 to just so you know you don't get confused, but
Boy.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's still a good one. I played them all though. I love them all.
I have two. And the thing is with God of War 2018, the main villain slash antagonist of the game is Baldur, who is I think the brother of Thor in the game's canon, and you face him I think a total of 3 different times within the story, which is I guess just like as a fun thing, it's the rule of the lucky 3, I guess. And Baldur as a main villain definitely has his presence known throughout the entire game. As what Gabe said, when that kind of goes against what I was saying initially, that secondary villains don't really have a lot of depth. I think, yeah, he's like Gabe is right that like yes, there are plenty of cases where secondary villains do have a lot of backstory behind them, and I think in their own way they can also be complementary to the main villain, which is what I was going to get into with God of War, because at some point in the story you face Thor's sons, Magni and Modi, I think that's what they're called, and they have a significance to Baldur being his being his nephews basically. And really that kind of interlinking with the story makes everything very personal. It makes like the fact that like the entire story is a very personal journey, not just for Kratos, the protagonist, but for the entire Norse pantheon that he is going up against. It just tells like such a compelling story with video game villains. Like God of War is certainly one example of that, and I guess Nier Automata is another. But basically, when video games are a very personal experience, and when you yourself deal that killing blow to the villain, or for every punch that the villain deals with you, that makes it so personal. And it just makes it such an engaging medium, I think, how video games write villains.
Well, I think the way that like a lot of mini bosses work in video games, like it kind of has to work because like I mean just from a game design and also a writing perspective, like you have to keep a player's focus. You can't just drop softballs throughout an entire game and expect a player to like stay engaged with the story and the narrative. Like you have to even if it's not like on the journey to the final boss, you have to still make that journey compelling and give people interesting like characters. Like there's a reason that like with Dark Souls people remember like the Nameless King before they talk about Soul Ascender. As cool as Soul Ascender is, like people talk about the Nameless King way more. Is it
Right?
And like the same thing happens with like the other Souls likes. Like pretty much all of them, they all have a big final boss, and it's like a big awesome final boss with a lot of lore. But like basically every other boss in those games also has like they're very memorable characters, or at the very least they're very memorable monsters, and they all have a lot of lore and like okay, so you said like they don't have a lot of depth, and it's probably true they don't have a lot of depth because these smaller villains don't have a ton of opportunity to like they're basically just showing up as a monster to hinder the protagonist, and by extension the players. Like they're just an obstacle, so they don't have an opportunity to really monologue at the player. The player doesn't have a big opportunity to get to know them. Like they don't have personalities, and they're not like, well, some of them have personalities, but they don't have like, you don't really know who they are. But like,
yeah, it's not as fleshed out compared to the main villain.
Basically what I was saying is like you get as like through those stories you get like these really tiny moments.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like with these smaller villains, it's almost like how vague it is, and the fact that like you don't really know everything about them, but you know just this little amount, and it almost makes them, in a lot of cases, I think it makes them like almost more interesting than the actual villain.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Yeah, and also kind of what you get at by that, the villain has to incorporate a gameplay because obviously it's a video game, and one one game that just kind of popped up when we were listening to you guys is Ghost of Tsushima, where it's an open world game, and I'm not going to spoil much of it, but the main villain is obviously the leader of the Mongols. I think his name is Kotal Khan. But what I like about that game is it's obviously open world, and the main villain you're fighting is the Mongolian army. There's no like subordinates. Did I say that right? Or henchmen under Kotal. Yeah. There's no subordinates. Yes, that's the word. There's none of those kind of mini bosses in Ghost of Tsushima, and frankly, you don't really see a lot of the Khan. Only in like 2 or 3 scenes, but his presence is always there because of either fighting notes or the entire Mongol army is just always there. So I like that where it's you don't see him, but he's always there. And that's another game where the antagonist it's a complicated game. It's like a book. You could write an essay about it. It's a whole nother thing. But he's going. Yeah,
with video games, I think that's just one way of tackling how to write villains and how to portray villains. Marie-Soleil, if I may call on you for a sec. You mentioned last episode that, I guess to kind of quote you verbatim, that Percy Jackson was Greek mythology fan fiction.
Yes.
To kind of get you to elaborate more on Percy Jackson, actually, or like to the best of your ability, because like I certainly can't. How are villains portrayed in books? Or I guess to open the conversation to how are villains written and portrayed in books? How is it written, or how is the big bad in Percy Jackson written?
The big bad in Percy Jackson, like the big bad evil guy, is Cronus. And you don't meet him until the last book of the first series. Throughout it, you're fighting against his you could call Luke his second in command, I guess. And every time you face him, Percy Jackson he defeats him, but he doesn't kill him, and he gets stronger every single time he shows up. He's been given more powers from Cronus because spoilers for the Percy Jackson book series, Cronus is planning on taking Luke's body as his own. And so throughout this, Luke is getting more powerful so that he can actually house the Titan's energy. And Percy will fight different mythological monsters. He fights Medusa, he fights the Minotaur, and so on and so forth. And most of these, they don't have, like the Minotaur is a fight while they're fleeing from the cabin they're renting. The Medusa, you find out more about, like they talk about her mythology and why she is the way she is. Now, Percy Jackson gets a lot of the mythology wrong, but it's a children's book. And like I said, it's Greek mythology fan fiction.
To be fair, a lot of the Greek myths are not exactly what we would consider child friendly in this day and age.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah, like the story of Medusa, for one thing, is very, I guess, like very watered down to a degree. Like, or in some adaptations, like a lot of people are being more, I guess, transparent with how the myth goes. But like for a long time, the story of Medusa has just been like she ended up for a long time, Medusa through myth was this like, she was a Gorgon, right? And she was like the one that Perseus had to defeat. But over time it had been revealed, her story had been revealed, and there's been a lot more sympathy towards this initial villain, I guess. And I don't know how it's been a while since I've read the books, so I don't know how well Medusa is portrayed in Percy Jackson, but...
So, if I may, in the first Percy Jackson book, when they fight Medusa, Annabeth, who is the daughter of Athena, says that Poseidon and Medusa were in love, and they got together in Athena's temple, and that's why Athena cursed Medusa.
Oh, right, okay.
And why Medusa is so determined to destroy Annabeth is because she's a daughter of Athena. And while she will turn Percy into a statue, she says she will keep the statue and cherish it, basically, because he reminds her of his father. Now, the author, Rick Riordan, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Riordan, he has...
Riordan. It's Riordan.
However you pronounce his name. I don't know. Everyone pronounces my name wrong, so I can pronounce other people's names wrong.
I love that energy. Yeah, pretty much.
Thank you. He's acknowledged the difference of this myth in he released another book that is like Percy Jackson narrating the stories of mythology, and he actually corrects the Medusa myth in that book, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. All right. I guess that was Percy Jackson then, to kind of transition over to another case, or to another story. We had touched on this in last week's episode, but basically I want to quickly touch on the Darkling again from Shadow and Bone, so I'm going to need Alex and Brooke's help specifically for this, and you know, as well as Charbel and Gabe, because they watched the show. But in the book, how did you guys find the Darkling being written as a villain?
Okay, so I just finished my reread of the Shadow and Bone trilogy, the Grisha trilogy, and I actually kind of like the Darkling as a villain. Like, I feel like I understand what his motivations are and like kind of what he's like trying to do, and like the way he opposes, like, is like an antagonist for Alina. He's also not like the most original villain ever, but like those books aren't exactly the most original books ever, like plot wise, so that's not that surprising.
Yeah, if you kind of look at it from the offset, like the name, the outfits, pretty much what he carries in and his backstory, it's very villain-esque. But to touch on Shadow and Bone, I think there is still complexity with the Darkling that kind of doesn't just make him like a very one-sided villain. He, you know, backstory aside, he was a very, or I think it's elaborated in the show, but he is a very like caring person for his kind, the Grisha, and was pretty much willing to do whatever to keep them like, or was willing to do as much as possible to keep said Grisha safe. But I don't know how much that's elaborated in the future books. But yeah, Brooke, what do you think on the Darkling?
Well, yeah, he was very obvious from the beginning that he was going to be the villain. I appreciated that they didn't go the route that much of like romancing him. Like, it was like there, but then as soon as she realized that he's the bad guy, it's like it's kind of gone again. Like, he's only really sympathetic in the way that he's caring for the Grisha, and in the twisted way caring for Alina, because he thinks that they're like the only two of their kind, of their power, that no one else can stand with them. So he probably feels like, you know, quite alone.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to agree with Alex. Not super original. He was just the dark guy in the series.
He's very much your like villain with a tortured past, or like bad boy with a tortured past, who's trying to do his best but has made some bad decisions that have ended up basically like corrupting him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be hard to
stereotypical cookie cutter kind of villain.
Yeah. And I mean, I applaud the effort, right? Like, it can definitely be pretty difficult to write a villain. And actually, before we get to case studies, I wanted to quickly touch on the long form authors in our conversation right now, specifically on writing villains, and just kind of talk about like what the experience is writing villains, because it is super difficult for me, because like for me at least, and Tyler can probably attest to this because he's read pretty much everything up to date, but writing external conflict through villains was challenging for me. Like, it can be pretty difficult to like write in a character's motive, or like it was pretty difficult for me writing the villain of my story as a villain. Like, I think the kind of mindset that I was going in with is that they're justified in their actions, and Porter, the protagonist, is in the way of that. And that was kind of what I was starting off with. But from there, how these actions are, like, you know, how these actions are portrayed and how they carry out their deeds, they probably think that they're justified, which makes my villain, at least, like I can kind of pat myself on the back for this, but like I'm working towards building a character that while is the antagonist for Porter and while is technically a villain through their actions, like they still feel like the ends justifies the means, basically. And I think that's what makes villain writing so challenging and so fun at the same time.
So, if I may, I have a teeny rant on this, and I was going to do it in my case study, even if it doesn't relate to character. In doing some research for this session, I kind of came to the assumption that there were 4 types of villain or antagonist. There's the ultimate evil, which has no necessary motivation. It's your Sith Lords. It's your big bad evil guy that's just evil. You've got natural, which is your predators, those aliens and whatnot that are clearly antagonists, but are just going off base instinct. The literal Alien movies are a direct example of this. Then we've got our reasonable villains, which we were just talking about, Dean, where your villain has a good motivation that comes into play and spawns their actions and spawns their beliefs. And those are often the best, but I've got a point on that, which I think you just segued me in wonderfully. But then there's the 4th type of villain, which, and this is a tough one, is the mentally ill. And this comes up a lot in supervillains and characters seen as psychotic or criminally insane, which I will get into more with my case study. But on the point of writing a reasonable villain, one that has really good motivations, that makes sense, and that you almost end up siding with, it's a villain. And this is something I, too, have struggled with. I was trying to write up a villain for a D&D group, and I straight up had to ask my friend who I was soundboarding with, all right, this guy is sounding way too reasonable. I would probably join him. How do we still make him a villain? And this is something I've now come across a whole bunch, is if we have a villain that's too good, the author or the director needs to stop the garnering of sympathy and make us realize that he's a villain. And this happens, if you hear the crunching of pretzels, I'm sorry, Marie-Soleil is hungry and I must feed her. Is that if we get a villain that's just too reasonable, we have to insert a villainous act to keep the audience in the right mindset. And this is most often seen, I've found, in superhero movies, because when we start siding too much with those communal, oh, humans are bad and poisoning the environment, blah, 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 we have to add in an act of violence to make sure that the audience doesn't actually believe in environmentalism or actually believe in anti-capitalism. Because look, you just tied anti-capitalism in with this abusive asshole. Can't be a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at you, Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
I'm looking at all the DC and Marvel.
All right.
I think I've talked about this before. The most egregious example of that in Marvel for me was Spider-Man: Homecoming. I will, to my dying breath, say that the Vulture was completely justified in literally every single thing that he did.
Yes.
And if Spider-Man had just left well alone, he would have just sold his guns and everything would have been fine. He didn't have to do a big plane heist at the end of the movie if there had been no intervention.
True.
It's like I think with a lot of them, they've at the very least sort of successfully gotten away with it, and had it so that I can still believe that this character is a villain, even if I sympathize with their motivations. And I think the Vulture, I can't even bring a single ounce of my being to think that he was even remotely in the wrong in literally anything that he did.
He didn't kill Peter though. That was a bit wrong.
Well, also
I mean, he threatened to kill Peter.
With the Vulture though.
He's a superhero. He can stop. He knew he could. I mean, okay, maybe he did try to kill Peter, but like,
All right.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm going to explode. I need to, because I just have Koba in my head.
Oh, yeah.
I need to talk about Koba because he is so sympathetic to me. Like, he was built up perfectly in the first movie and then the beginning of the second movie. He's had a horrible past. Of course he's going to hate humans. And I was super sympathetic with him the entire movie. The only reason that he's a villain to me, because I didn't root for the humans. I didn't give a shit about him. The only reason that I think of him as a villain is because of what he did to Caesar. Because I like Caesar.
He tried to fuck her boy over.
Mm-hmm.
He tried to kill Caesar, you know? Like, that's the only reason that he's a villain in my mind, because otherwise I'm like, fuck yeah. Koba has had every right to do this, you know?
What's interesting about Koba to me is that, like, I mean, I feel like it's sort of a different thing from, like, cause with the Marvel thing, I do feel like it's like they came up with a sympathetic villain because they were like, oh, we need to have a sympathetic villain. But then halfway through the writing process, they were like, okay, guys, back up a second. He's too sympathetic. We need to do something. I feel like everything with Koba was like intentional, and like what's sort of fucked up about just everything about Koba is I feel like had Koba not like tried to shoot Caesar, and had Koba like not done his chicanery, like I feel like he would have inevitably been proven right after like a long enough time. He would have just been proven right, like completely without any intervention.
Yeah, it goes into what Tyler was saying, like that balance between writing a reasonable villain, like suddenly where is the line between them becoming like still classified as a villain versus just being an anti-hero?
Well, I like what Tyler said.
A little bit too far.
Well, it doesn't always have to be like an act of violence to just like they're kind of obvious when it's a big act of violence to distinguish that this is the bad guy. It's sort of like the world. When the world puts the situations for the villain to becomes a villain, I kind of like that too. And I see it a lot in what's it called? Or the world will be some bullshit like these beings exist. It's a lot of it in fantasy. Like in Warhammer, you have the planes of chaos. Like these are just beings solely created to destroy, and they're evil. Or in Lord of the Rings, you got Sauron and all that shit.
Right.
But those ones are just like obviously they're the bad guys. Their sole entity is to destroy everything else. So you don't really need a big act of violence to prove that they're the villain.
Right. Yeah. It could just be their ideals, right? Or maybe their situation and upbringing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is that's an example of the ultimate evil villain archetype, right?
Yeah,
where
let's
there
touch
is
on
no
that.
motivation. The ultimate evil. One moment, Marie-Soleil did have something if there's no pretzels in her mouth.
Yeah, all right, go ahead.
I just had a comment on like the talk about the vulture, and the vulture he sold alien technology to normal street thugs who took out the deli. I think that was the deli that Peter had visited.
They only did that because Spider-Man intervened. They were just trying to innocently rob a bank. Which is perfectly fine, in my opinion.
And innocently rob a bank, by the way.
There was no one there. No one was in danger.
No one was in danger. The bank was closed. They were just dismantling capitalism. Spider-Man intervened and got the deli blown up.
And nobody was injured in that case. But what if they sold the alien technology to a different person that shot a child? Or shot a pregnant woman?
I think this is
Or a
looking
cat.
too much into. Yeah, I think
That would be bad, but that's on the criminal. I mean, okay, wait. I don't want to
the
get
one
into
that put it in their hands. Who's guilty? The gunman or the
legal?
This is a slippery slope into a discussion. I don't think we should.
Legal that I saw on YouTube.
It's
called,
good
like,
to look into things. Yeah, it's good to look, I guess, into what ifs, but maybe Marvel can do that with their fucking series. I don't know anymore, but yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, just looking into like what boundaries were they willing to push. But I think
isn't Spider-Man the villain because he blew up the fucking deli? The deli store owner the next morning.
That wasn't an intentional thing. Okay, wait, stop.
Every time Spider-Man intervened in that movie, he made everything worse. The deli blew up because Spider-Man intervened with an innocent bank robbery.
Child,
guys,
bank robber. By the way.
Guys, please.
There's a boat that got blown in half because he intervened with an innocent gun deal that the FBI were already there to stop.
Guys, are we good?
Okay, I'm done.
All right. I think as we're kind of wrapping up on just this general discussion on villains, now that we have the 4 types that Tyler had said, I think going into our case studies, I do want to also bring up one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is the different conflicts within a story. That would probably help factor into case studies, and that will factor into mine. But basically, how conflict is written is in several different ways. There is, I guess, the protagonist versus an antagonist, or like an external antagonist. There's a protagonist versus a internal antagonist, usually themselves. There is protagonist versus society, protagonist versus, I think, spiritual threats, I think, if that's one of them. But there's plenty of them that kind of factor in just how not just how this villain is written, but how audiences perceive said villain. Because as Tyler was saying, and he can kind of correct me where possible, but how these conflicts tie into the kind of villain that it is kind of like makes it kind of defines the threat that the protagonist has to face, and kind of decides the villain, basically. Because if it's an internal conflict with if it's an internal conflict, then the protagonist is also the antagonist in a way, which in itself is a really interesting story. But I think because we're focusing a lot on external villains to a degree, that's it's just an interesting way of like framing how thing. Okay, so thanks to Gabe for providing this on our Discord. So there is 9, I guess, different conflicts. So man versus nature, man versus man, man versus God, man versus society, man versus self, man versus no God, man versus technology, man versus reality, and then man versus author. So I think not to kind of go into that tangent a little bit more and to kind of get into our case studies. I said before that I would probably start and to look at one of the biggest popular mainstream, or I guess one of the biggest mainstream antagonists that have probably, that's been built up for a long time, it is Thanos from the MCU. Not to kind of get into the whole backstory of Thanos, because we could, that's probably a long thing that a lot of people, at least here, are already familiar with. Thanos is a very memorable villain. I think he initially he had the sense of like being the ultimate evil, like Tyler said, wherein he kind of just wanted to dominate the world and whatever. But over time, as villain writing became more complex and nuanced, Thanos eventually became a reasonable villain. His reasonable villain to an extent. He was still very justified in his actions as a villain. Like, a lot of his intents were villainous, and definitely it kind of split the border between like sympathizing with him and going against him. But how he was written as a character, how he was portrayed in the show, and his impact of completing his deed, to me at least, made him one of the most interesting case studies as a person worth talking about, I think. And so many people have followed along the journey, because obviously the MCU is huge. But yeah, that was, I think, kind of my initial introduction to Thanos. So let's talk about Thanos.
I'll be honest, I didn't like him that much personally, because guess what? I sympathized with him, and I'd snap all the people in half myself if I fucking could.
Yo, don't cut yourself with that edge.
Thanos is a mouthless head. I don't respect him.
However, my first introduction to Thanos was the comics, which, if anyone knows the MCU, they're basically just rehashing a bunch of old comic runs with fancy CGI, which is fine. But I kind of preferred Thanos in the MCU, in the comics at the very least, his motivation was very different. He didn't want to save anyone. He was big, bad, evil Titan, corrupted by power, and he was courting Lady Death. And he wanted to give her a wedding present, a dowry, if you will, to try and get her attention. And that's why he did all this. Funny thing, Lady Death is in love with Deadpool, I'm pretty sure, at least in this comic run. So he kind of gets cucked by Deadpool in this case, which, for wacky as comics are, I thought that was a very interesting motivation. Love of death in itself as a greater concept would be a much better story, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Especially because, guess what? Then you don't have people sympathizing. You can keep it big, bad, evil, scary, purple dude. I do like the motivation. I simply think that if he's a character as smart as Thanos is, that there are better methods than halving the population. You could slow growth rates. You could cause everyone's metabolism to require less resources. You could double the available resources. With a literal wish spell, there's so many options, and that part seemed a little rushed to me.
Mm-hmm. I think therein, though, like, still deciding, like, kind of avoiding all of that and still deciding to, like, you know, snap half the universe in half, that still makes him that still, in my eyes at least, makes him a villain, justified motivation or not. Because, like, you're right, like, in the years since his grand plan was unveiled, and how, you know, there could have been so many different what ifs about this scenario. Like, he had the power to do whatever he wanted through the Infinity Stones, and still chose to snap half the universe in half, or like still choose to snap the universe in half. Like, that still makes him it still keeps him as a villain, basically. It still keeps him within that kind of arc where he is very self-serving to a degree. He feels like he is not self-serving, but he is very much so. That makes sense.
Allow me to jump.
Sorry, I just find it interesting that you find him, like, sympathetic, because I don't. Like, I mean, like, I understand his motivations are sympathetic, but I just feel like his methods are not.
Well, yeah, obviously, like Tyler had said, and like how many people have said in the years past, there were so many different ways that any other person could have done this, but the fact that he still, like, went through with he still decided to go through with snapping half the universe in half, or like snapping the universe in half, that probably still makes him, like, not a hero to mostly everybody. He considers himself the hero in that situation, which makes it a compelling showcase. But, like, for everyone else, or for a lot of people, he's very much a villain through his actions.
Yeah. See, I just don't find him a compelling character personally, but maybe that's just me.
I mean, I don't really blame you. Like, Marvel has had a villain problem for a long time. That could probably factor into it.
It sure has.
Marcus, were you going to say something?
Honestly, I don't remember much about Thanos. My favorite scene of him was, like, when he took little Gamora and just, like, putting this knife on her finger. It was like, oh, yo, it's to balance. Like, if it's balanced, then it's meant to be, or something like that. And this man just slaughters. And it's like, I guess that, like, seeing that scene made me picture him as a villain, because, like, he used manipulation tactics or something like that. But, like, in all of the circumstances, if I didn't see that scene, I would just be like, this guy's he has good intentions, I think. Like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
If I may jump one more thing in about Thanos, which is the idea of cutting the universe in half to save the other half. I don't know if anyone studied too much philosophy, but there is a philosophical belief system called utilitarianism, in that the happiness and well-being of the majority is the correct action. And there's problems with utilitarianism. I'm not going to say that there isn't. I'm not particularly one. I'm a hedonist. But in the utilitarianistic theory, Thanos did exactly right by a certain philosophical theory, whereas opposed to the philosophy of heroes or others, he did follow exactly that any means justifies the end as long as the majority is happy and survived, or
Okay,
in the
but
very least survived.
if he's cutting out half of the population, that's not the majority because they're perfectly equal.
No, and like I said, that's why there's problems with utilitarianism in general, is when you get into that 51-49 split. And it's a tough call, but to save 50%, to damn 50% is still a utilitarianism principle.
Don't miss that unit of high school social studies.
I took this in uni.
You
What are
just
you
said
talking about?
you just said a lot of big words, and I was just like, yeah.
Yeah,
Did
that
no
was
one
high school.
else study this in high school?
No, yeah,
I studied it. Yeah.
When I was in high school.
Yeah, I did.
I studied it, yeah, but like that part of my brain's gone now, bro. I replaced that with
Dude, I love social studies.
Okay.
University degree philosophy, everyone. Just say it.
Yeah. I guess while we're still touching on Thanos, Brooke, do you have any kind of weigh in on his character?
Well, one of my big problems with Endgame was that his character got like completely snubbed, and it was Thanos that hadn't been through the experiences that he had, so I felt he hadn't had a growth and development that the other one had. So he was Thanos to me was sort of sympathetic, like where he was going, like he wanted to save the universe. He just did very wrong means of it for an end. And my problem with Endgame was that it was no longer that Thanos, and he literally just wanted to beat the Avengers, and like in that case, it kind of seemed more like just ultimate power, big bad kind of guy. And I just found him a lot less compelling in that movie. So
Yeah, I agree. I guess just as a character, suddenly switching to a previous version of yourself, like after familiarizing and like really like getting being compelled by the version of Thanos in Infinity War, which had been one of the stronger villains, I think, in Marvel's Phase 3, like suddenly reverting back to essentially Guardians Thanos was it was a change. It was a choice.
it was depressing.
It was depressing, yeah. Like it's kind of thing, like it kind of makes sense because the Thanos that was decapitated early on in Endgame, like his arc was done basically. So what else were they really, or how else could they have done that? But that's probably a conversation for another day.
I mean, they could have done more. I feel like, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know what more they could have done, but I feel like getting jumped while he's harvesting some yams, I feel like there was a better way.
Like,
bro, I'm pretty sure there's a meme of like Thanos where like he's like gathering all his harvest stuff and shit, and then like he gets tackled by all the Avengers. It's just like vibe check.
He could have at least been doing something other than like, I like the idea that he's just like a villain who sort of does villain thing, and now he's just a farmer. Like that's a neat idea. But like for like one scene, that's kind of neat. But then for the rest of the movie, it's like he's not there because he's fucking dead. But then his old self is like, he's like, oh, the old Thanos, he's so cool. Oh, I want to be him. And it's it's like, I feel like there was probably a much better way. There was probably a better point in time that they could have brought Thanos back from that would have just been a more compelling Thanos, or just not like a time.
Not at all. It just kind of felt like they shoehorned him in, like just to have the big fight at the end kind of thing.
You took everything from me. I don't even know who you are. Like that pretty much sums up everything. Like
exactly. You don't even know who he's fighting anymore. There's no connection between them.
Yeah.
it's like it's used as a fucking punchline that he's just a fucking oblivious moron running around with all these people who some sort of hate him, but they don't hate him. They hate the version of him that they fought. They don't know who this guy is, and he doesn't know who they are. It's a I don't know. Yeah, it's a very lame. I mean, okay, I'm not going to call Endgame lame. I'm not a contrarian. I'm not going to say that like the highest grossing movie of all time is lame. But
It is lame.
it's not even the highest
Money
grossing
is-
movie anymore. It's second.
Wait, what's first?
Avatar.
Money does not. mean
Oh,
it's
Avatar's sick.
no,
I see-
but like
actually seen
I'm not
Avatar.
I'm not gonna just say something for controversy's sake. But
Mhm.
my point is though, I feel like what the
Gabe,
fuck was my
you're
point? I completely lost it.
trending on Twitter. Holy shit. Everyone's fucking pissed, man. I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
What was my point? Oh yeah, okay. So it just feels very nerfed that like you have this big final conflict and you have this whole scene where like the army's coming out and it's like and all these you have this big war that's about to happen. And the first time you're watching it, you're like, oh, this is fucking awesome. But then like when you go back and rewatch it, you're like, none of these characters have any investment in what the fuck is happening here.
Mhm.
Most of the characters here have no idea what's going on. Some of them have just been like most of the characters involved in this fight have either come through a time portal or just got just got fucking PowerPoint transitioned back into existence like 5 seconds ago. And then Doctor Strange came and picked them up with a bunch of portals. And like no one in that scene knows what's happening.
Yeah, like it's a cool moment for the audience, but ultimately, like you said,
Bro.
going back into it, there's no attachment to Thanos.
Like on some level, I can respect like the commitment of like just like okay, so I guess we're back now. Let's do more war. And I mean,
Yeah.
if I were, there's probably a more like nitpicky thing to get into how like a bunch of those characters just came from the battle at the end of Infinity War and they're probably super exhausted and now Doctor Strange is like it's time for another one, we're doing another war right now, let's go.
Bro, I just imagine like Doctor Strange, like he appears first, and then everyone else gets together, and then Doctor Strange manifests a PowerPoint presentation of what has just happened in the past 5 years, and like he's rushing through this PowerPoint presentation. He's like, okay, this happened and this happened. I did this because of this thing. So don't be mad at me, by the way. But now it's like you hired a bunch of kids to work at a restaurant. You give them 5 minutes to like be like, okay, this is what you do. You do it like this and this and this. Everyone's just like, okay. And then like, okay, now go through this door.
Oh my god.
Get on the till.
Like it's a very weird finale like when you actually like break it down to what it is.
Yeah.
No, it was
but
cool. It was cool.
I think that's probably just overanalyzing, and that's getting off topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man,
So
okay. You go first, Dean.
no, I was gonna move on. So
Yo.
unless you want to,
Me too, because okay, I'll be honest, I haven't seen any of this shit, and I haven't seen any of the DC movies. I never seen Dark Knight, but the only one I saw was Joker because I look like a psychological horror more than a superhero movie. Do you guys want to talk about that? But that's a whole shit show. By the way, that's not my case study.
we can talk about that after the
He-
case studies.
That's my case study.
All right.
The
Okay,
Joker,
well
dude,
then-
that movie was fucking wild.
Yeah, we'll get to that eventually, but I think next on the list is Alex for her case study.
Great. I totally don't feel unprepared now. Yeah, so the character, the villain that I wanted to talk about is Hannibal Lecter, specifically from
Oh my
NBC
God.
Hannibal. From NBC Hannibal, because I haven't caught up with any other versions of the story.
Oh,
Sorry. I'm adding them to my list.
I thought you talked about Silence of the Lambs. I'm like, let's fucking go.
I'm adding it to my list because I actually want to watch it.
It's
Bro,
so good.
Bro, just hearing Charbel in the back, it's like lowly just say, "Oh," like it's so sad.
No, listen, I love NBC Hannibal. It's like one of my like all-time favorite shows. And I've talked about Hannibal before. When we did our favorite characters episode I don't even remember when we did that. It was a long time ago.
That was back in like October of 2020, I think. Or that was when I uploaded it. We did that session like during the summer last year.
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. That's why I'm trying to like. But yeah. Anyway, go on.
Sorry, I feel like all out of sorts now. How should I approach this?
Talk about Hannibal Lecter as a thing. I guess like talk about him as a character first, and then see where that kind of fits along. Like where that kind of fits along, like him as a villain. Like how does that? Like how is he as a character like a danger to everyone else? I guess besides the obvious.
Besides, the obvious, he's a serial killer part.
Yeah, but I'm not familiar with NBC's Hannibal, so you have thing.
Yeah, I think part of what makes him such an interesting character and villain to me is like his relationship with the protagonist Will is very personal. Like Hannibal, they first meet when Hannibal becomes Will's therapist. And Hannibal becomes like very obsessed with Will almost. It's kind of bringing back like the Darkling Alina thing in Shadow of Bone. Hannibal kind of has this fascination with Will, in that he feels like Will is one of the only people that can like understand him, because Will has an empathy disorder where he can like basically put himself into the mind of anyone. And so you actually see it a lot throughout the show, where there will be like the bad guy of the episode will sometimes also have this obsession with Will, where they're like, oh, you're the only one who can understand me. And it also ends up getting Will in a lot of trouble, because then other people are like, oh, if he can think like a serial killer, what's to stop him from becoming a serial killer? And what I find interesting about Hannibal is he's very much manipulates Will in this way to try and get him to understand him, to like be the person at his side. He's a very manipulative character. Like that's what he's good at. And it's the relationship between them that I find really, really interesting, and the way that Hannibal plays with it and uses it to his advantage to continue being an awful person and try and take Will down that path with him. So I guess in that sense, like he is a threat to society at large, because he kills people a lot. There's a lot of murder in that show. Don't watch it if you have a weak stomach. But he's a direct threat to Will, because he's trying to like lead him down that path with him, make Will into a bad person, make Will understand him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with other kinds of dynamics like that, but like having your protagonist and your antagonist so close together, that sounds fascinating.
It's literally like what makes the show so interesting, is like how intertwined the two characters are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I do have a question, Alex. Now, I've never seen any of the Hannibals anywhere in the timeline, but I wonder if in the show, because everyone knows the basis of Hannibal is, a serial killer and cannibal, depending on which variant we're listening to or watching. Does it go into the fact that, he is probably mentally ill as villains go, as opposed to, just a big bad guy? Hey, this is a mental illness, and if we treat this, he might be normal one day.
He's also a psychologist.
Still probably bad.
It does,
yeah, right?
It does go into that a little bit, and that's like one of the issues I have with, that stuff in general. Like they play up the very much like, oh, he's a psychopath. He doesn't understand how to deal with emotions kind of stuff. Which, yeah.
Yeah, but Alex, like, it's on Silence of the Lambs on Netflix, and I think it's technically the sequel, but the movie's a prequel. Fuck, I don't remember the name. I think it's called like Black Lamb or something. That's also on Netflix.
Gabe,
I got a little funny story.
Yeah, Charbel,
But,
actually, if you want to elaborate on Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, because if you want to elaborate on it, because there's obviously two different versions of it that I'm more familiar with. Like, there's NBC's Hannibal, and then there's Silence of the Lambs Hannibal. So if I could get you to elaborate on him for a little bit.
Is the show a prequel? I'm guessing, Alex.
I think it's completely unrelated to the movie.
Unrelated. Okay, in the movie, what I liked about Silence of the Lambs, it's sort of the same thing you were just saying. Basically, they're looking for this other serial killer that's like, I don't want to get gruesome. Anyways, the detective is using Hannibal to kind of figure out the psychology of this other killer, because Hannibal himself was a psychologist before he started killing and eating people. So there's a really close relationship between the protagonist and Hannibal. Keep in mind, so Hannibal, it's fucking weird. Like, you don't know if he's really the antagonist. It is a great fucking horror movie. It's from the 90s, so there's some shit that's out of date, obviously. The main villain is the serial killer that's killing and killing whatever. And you don't see a lot of him. A lot of it is just that interaction between Hannibal Lecter and the detective who's going after. And it's the relationship is like 80% of the movie. It's such a good fucking horror movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like a little context for that, because I have read some of the book, or I started reading Red Dragon at one point, which is
that's the one about the Red Dragon. Yeah, that's
So like in the books, there are I think 4 books, and they like take place in like backwards chronological order from the order they were released in.
I thought,
but Hannibal is like earlier, so this would take place before Silence of the Lambs, and it's like about catching Hannibal, and then after that, after that you go into Silence of the Lambs. Then I think Red Dragon is the third one chronologically.
I think Red Dragon is the first, and then Silence of the Lambs, and I don't remember what the third one's called. But you're right. The Red Dragon's about them hunting Hannibal. I can't pull it up.
So like after Hannibal. After Hannibal is caught, then Will and the other detectives sometimes go to him for help with catching like the villain of the week or whatever, or the other serial killers.
That's the same thing in that's how Silence of the Lambs starts. The main character is using Hannibal to...
Yeah, because that's like how it is in the books too. Like I never finished Red Dragon, but like it is.
I want to check. I want to see the movie first.
They're hunting this dude, and then they go to Hannibal, and they're like, "We need your help with this. You're so smart. Help us."
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to see the movie before I read the book.
Oh, sorry, Charbel. What was that?
Yeah. No, that's like I'd rather see the movies before I read the book, because I find I can put an actor's face to the characters. Mm-hmm. That's just me.
Gabe, what were you trying to say earlier? Sorry, I just think I caught that you were trying to say something.
No, it was nothing. Never mind.
Okay.
You were gonna say in the 3rd season they do the Red Dragon plot of Hannibal.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was. I didn't know that. I didn't know you'd read Red Dragon, so I was like.
I haven't finished it. I started reading it, but I haven't finished it. I want to finish it at some point.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like. Oh, sorry.
Fuck, I gotta tell the story. It's fucking hilarious. So when I was watching Silence of the Lamb, you've probably seen this scene on Family Guy, but there's a scene when one of the characters, it's transphobic. The movie's pretty transphobic, and it's from the 90s. But anyways, he puts his genitalia between his legs and kind of pretends to be a lady, and it's really fucking weird. And the Goodbye Horses is playing, and I love that song, and he's dancing. Anyways, my mother walks in on me watching this, and then she's just like, "What the fuck are you watching?" And then I had to give her, in like 10 minutes, the last hour and a half leading up to this scene. And then she's like, okay. And then she just like, "Oh, so what, are you going to catch him?" I was like, "You got to watch." So we watched the last half an hour, and she's like, "Oh, that's kind of shitty." I was like, "Well, you don't like horror movies. Why did you join me?" I enjoyed it. It was a good horror movie.
Oh my goodness. God, I hope that never happens with the kind of media that I watch. But I think I guess the kind of like
what do you watch?
Shh, I don't know I didn't know where I was going with that, but let's move past it. I think in listening to this, there seems to be a kind of core dynamic that a lot of Hannibal stories explores, and that is just how he, like, as a serial killer, like, that's pretty shitty. That's a pretty, like, big factor to be like, yeah, he is not a good guy. But it's just how Hannibal interacts with the protagonists of the respective story, whether it's, whether it is in NBC or if it's in the movies. Like, that seems to be like how Hannibal uses his I guess, like, how he manipulates them into coercing with him and making him more than just this serial killer initially, right? Like, obviously he's still very much a serial killer, but it's through the lens of the protagonist that we kind of explore just how twisted and how fucked up this person really is. But at the same time, it's like, it's still a relationship, right? Like, it's something that is made to invest in.
Yeah, and that's, like, I talked about this a little bit in the favorite characters episode when I was talking about Hannibal, but he's a very charismatic character. Because I've watched the show like 3 times now, and every time I watch it throughout the whole first season, like, he's the person that they're hunting. Like, it. You're watching characters, like, eat food at his house, and you're like, that's person. But the way he is as a person, he's so charismatic that you start to doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, this is, like, again, this is just the show, because that's all I'm, like, fully familiar with. And I think that's a big credit to, like, the writing and the directing and all that stuff too. And the acting, of course. But it's just like the way he's written as a character, like, you really start to understand why people trust him, even though he's a bad person,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how, or I say it's interesting a lot, but it really is, like, it's so complex how people write villains, I guess. Like, whether it is through nefarious words or it's through like shitty action after shitty action. And I think the latter of which kind of transitions us perfectly to who Gabe is going to be talking about. Gabe?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
I was wondering what was happening.
I set
really
you
quiet.
up perfectly. I fucking quit. I don't want to do this anymore.
I'm sorry. That didn't sound like the end of your sentence. I was waiting
How
for
much?
you to I don't know the way that you were doing. I was like, is he done talking?
Yeah, I was like,
okay.
Fucking Gabe, go.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the villain I want to talk about is I have talked about Makima from Chainsaw Man in a previous episode where I screamed about her. So that episode was about least favorite characters. So this is gonna be, I'm gonna go the opposite way and talk about why she's an amazing villain. So, man, I'm having a total brain fart for words.
You and me
okay.
both.
All right, so like Makima. So basically, quick setup for who Makima is. Basically, in Chainsaw Man, there are devils, and the way that devils work in Chainsaw Man is that a devil is like a manifestation of fear. So if people are afraid of something, then a devil is created, and then the devil's power sort of comes from like how much people fear that thing. So basically, and like the series goes on with this. So Makima is the control devil, and just represents, and her all of her power comes from like people's fear of being controlled, and she has like very hypnotic powers. But so the reason though, the way that she's like in shit, I am not doing good for words right now. Hang on.
I think so. As we were talking about in previous thing, as we were talking about with Alex's example with Hannibal, Makima is really tied to the main protagonist, isn't she?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, she is. Basically, the whole story is about how the the chainsaw devil is like the most powerful, supposedly, and because unlike where most of the devils derive their power from human fear, the chainsaw devil is feared in hell by other devils, so he has this immense power. But the main character Denji, who's just this like he's this poor devil hunter, and after some shit goes very very wrong, he basically gets fused with the chainsaw devil, and so most of the bulk of the story is about Makima uh, sort of bringing Denji up as a devil hunter, while also secretly trying to like sap out his or draw out his power and draw out the actual chainsaw man, and not just Denji with a freaky chainsaw head.
Yeah,
There,
and like I had been, like I had kind of said in the initial build up, like it's through like shitty action after shitty action that Makima fucks with Denji, right?
what's interesting is that it's not exactly just shitty action. It sort of builds to that later on. But what makes Makima sort of fucked up and evil is that like it's not exactly just an evil action, but like this outright good actions that are sort of done maliciously. So basically the bulk of the series is like she finds this. So Denji's basically he's like dirt poor at the start of the series. He basically lives on like one loaf of bread that he just has to make last for like until he gets paid again. And he's selling his body parts for money. Shit's really bad for this dude.
Yeah.
And
oh my god.
then yeah. Oh yeah, it's fucked up. The first fucking panel of the thing is him like going over his like income. He's talking about how like he sold a kidney, an eye, and one of his testicles for money, and like how that's gonna help him cover his debt because he's indebted to the Yakuza.
Jesus fucking Christ! Did you tell me this before?
Yeah, I don't know if I told you that part before, but Denji's
Holy
like the super fucked up.
Okay,
There's also
anyway.
the anime soon.
They are doing the anime soon. That's why I want to gas the series up as much as possible before the anime comes out. But basically, so she comes in and then she starts giving him like actual food. She starts like sort of making his life slowly better, introducing him to like people who become like his really close friends. And all of it is basically with the intention of at some point eventually tearing it all down and ripping it away from him, sending him back to square one. She basically wants to like, because what's basically happened is that he's in the state that he's in at the start of the series. He's depressed, but he's fine with it because that's really all he's ever known. So Makima's whole fucking thing in the series is that she is trying to like gas up his life and like make his life slowly better so that she can then tear it away and put him back to where he was. And it's like he walks on glass for all his life and then his feet adapt to it. So then she gives him shoes for the first time and then eventually and then takes the shoes off and is like, all right, go walk on glass again, you fucker. Now that his feet have adapted to actual, this is a weird metaphor, but I'm hoping that it makes sense.
Yeah, I got you. I got you.
Okay. And like, so it's her and Denji's relationship is fucked up and weird, and her and the other characters' relationship in that series is also super fucked up and weird. Because like, the thing with Denji is that Denji is so the whole Denji's whole motivation is that he wants to bang her. And he is so wrapped up in his immense simpery that he can't see how obvious it is that she's like manipulating him, that this is what the series is actually about. He's the extremely horny man who is obsessed with the villain. And so like it's sort of like a twist villain thing, but instead of it being a twist villain, it's really only a twist for like the main character, because basically every other character knows that like Makima is super evil and has to be stopped eventually, and like some of the characters are always conspiring against Makima.
Yeah.
And like there's this one subplot where you have a bunch where like there's a bunch of other devil hunters who are trying to get Denji because there's like a big bounty on his head, but one of the other main characters, he's like conspiring with one of the villains to try to assassinate Makima while this arc is happening, and that's that comes late in the series, but it's the first time that you really get the sense that like that Denji is the only one who hasn't really like seen through the guys, and every other character is like generally aware that Makima is like it might be the leader of the Devil Hunter Association, but she's also fucked up and evil and has some really sinister plans for the world, and like is basically just using people as a means to her end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of ties back into like Hannibal's relationship with the protagonist. Like how is it that this like evil person manipulates everyone and makes them serve them, I guess.
I mean, in the case of Denji, it is kind of just like she's just taking advantage of the fact that he's a horny teenager. But I mean, with everyone else, it's not super complicated. She's basically just like her control powers can basically cause like people to. She can just like take over people's minds, and just like her she has a really interesting design. Her eyes are like that sort of hypnosis imagery, and like there's a lot of panels where it gets really up fucking close, and like and she's very creepy looking, and so it's not like the most complicated or interesting explanation that she's just controlling people's minds, but the way that it's handled in the series is very fucking creepy, and like it makes it a lot more interesting than if it had just been like that she just waves her hands and people are being controlled by her. Like it almost, with some of the characters who like get controlled by her, it almost makes it feel like it's like a like she just taps into people's subconscious more than she just hypnotizes them, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Like
yeah, there's sorry, go ahead.
Like I was just gonna say, there's this one panel of her that is just like, maybe it's just because I know the context of it, but every time I look at this, I'm just like, it's just fucking bone chilling, creepy shit. And yeah, she's a great villain.
Yeah, everything like I've heard you talk about Chainsaw Man for a long time now, up until this point, and everything or every new thing that I hear just makes me like both want to read the series more and like really is like, holy shit, who wrote this thing?
Yeah, Fujimoto is like, he's a fucking madman. I have nothing but respect for him. Everything I've read of his, both Chainsaw Man and Fire Punch, I'm just convinced he's like out of his mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that
I have to
name.
respect that. All right. I think that's that with Makima. Like I've said again, it's always so fucked. I think just
yeah,
like chipping away at this one series, and hopefully I get to read it soon. But anyway, let's move on to Brooke's case study. The hell was that?
Panic.
Okay. Do you need a minute?
Well, then probably I hope, but also Kingpin, but I don't know.
I don't think that's any language.
What?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I guess I'm going to stand by my character, and I'm gonna talk about SpiderVerse again.
Do it.
All right.
I don't even know how to go about this. It's like,
Well, okay, so with SpiderVerse, I guess I can lead you in. So with SpiderVerse,
Are you gonna rain on my parade?
no, I was just gonna lead you in, but I mean,
No,
I will.
get
Okay.
Goodness.
Sorry,
Anyway,
go ahead.
in SpiderVerse, there's like kind of like 3 villains going on, and I kind of want to talk about all of them. So, unfortunately, as much as I love her, she's the simplest one. So Doc Ock, going into it, I don't read any of the comics for Marvel and whatnot, so I didn't know any of these characters going in. So I didn't know the equivalent of Doc Ock in this was going to be the female Doc Ock. So I had no idea. She was a complete surprise to me, but a very pleasant one at that, and I enjoyed her character very thoroughly because she was extremely enthusiastic about it. And it was such a turn because it's like she's just checking out Peter and she's being like, what's going on here? You're like, glitching. But I can't wait to watch it happen. It's like, and she's just very fun. She's a perfect fighty, punchy person for this film. But she's the lesser of the 3, I think.
I agree.
And then we have counterpart to Miles Morales, which is his uncle, which I thought was perfect because, people always bring up that one scene where Miles meets Peter Parker for the first time, and the colors of their 2 backgrounds change. Miles was purple and green, which is the Prowler's colors, and Peter Parker is blue and red. And as they're doing their spider connection sensey thingy, I'm going to stop talking like that now. Miles's colors switch to Peter Parker's colors, which everyone says it's a hint that if Miles hadn't met Peter Parker, he would have gone down the path of his uncle, and his uncle would have trained him to be the next Prowler. So that sets up his uncle as being an antagonist to him. And it becomes amazing because Miles finds out before his uncle does that his uncle is Prowler, and Prowler doesn't know Miles is the new Spider-Man. It's very tense, very high situation. I love that. It's so good for that movie because it's like Kingpin is the bad guy, but like it feels like the threat is his uncle for a while. Like such a fear when he realizes the truth about it.
Right.
But all my notes are, on Kingpin. So, and also, of course, is like extremely sad when his uncle dies. But like, I feel like that was a bit of a redemption for him. So he's not like super villainy to me, but he was like perfect counterpart to Miles' story, being what like draws him truly into being the Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to the big bad of Spider-Verse, that being Kingpin. I love his physical design. I know that he is like that in the comics, but I feel like they made him so much larger in this movie. Like he's literally larger than life. Like freaking massive, big menacing guy. Perfect against really small Miles. Like Miles is one of the smallest one of the Spider crew, other than like Penny and Ham, of course. But Ham doesn't really count because he's a pig. Anyway, this is Miles' universe. It feels very suiting that like he makes his suit black and Kingpin, boss man, and he's always wearing his black suits, but he's a large, intimidating figure. I found his backstory quite motivating. It was like, it makes sense, for him to want to find his family, and the whole thing is driven by this plot that he wants to find his family, bring them back from a different dimension. And so you feel sympathetic to him, but at the same time, you're like, he's a bad guy. Because what got his family killed was him beating up Spider-Man and his wife and son seeing that and running away from the house and ultimately getting the crash and dying. So it is his fault. Him being bad is the reason that they're dead. But it's still very sympathetic that he's a man in grief and his actions are completely led by this destructive emotion.
Right.
And we know that he's like big bad, like immediately, because he kills Spider-Man, like just right off the bat. He's just freaking bam, bam, you dead, bitch. Give her to the body. Like, whoa. No one expected that going in. Well, I didn't anyway. I don't know about anyone else. So it's like he's a real serious threat. And so in the final battle, with just Miles and Kingpin, also, by the way, great, because it's like the Spider crew had been fighting all together, but by that point, it's just Miles, and it's just Miles fighting Kingpin. He doesn't have anyone to back him anymore, so it's literally Miles' shining point. It's him versus Kingpin, and it's just daunting. It's horrifying to watch because you know that Miles could actually die. Kingpin has already killed a Spider-Man. What's one more? What's one more who's a child who just got his powers, you know? It's horrifying to watch. And it works so perfectly in that scene. Seeing Miles get back up and defeat him on his own, in his own way, and fully become Spider-Man, fully take the reins. This is who he is now. So I just, you know, like, do I have anything else? Yeah, you know?
Yeah.
Kingpin.
Yeah. I think, like, while we're kind of talking about Spider-Man, there was some kind of insight that I wanted to touch on, and that is the fact that Spider-Man as a franchise has always had some kind of its own villain problem. Like, it seems to me that Spider-Verse was probably the best cinematic way of balancing said villain problem, because, like you had said, despite Doc Ock being the weaker of the three, she still had a very compelling presence as a secondary antagonist. Like, she was still like, what am I trying to say? Like, as like taking up the mantle of Dr. Octopus, she was intimidating as hell and didn't even need to be the main antagonist. Prowler was a really special exception because, like, it was such a personal relationship to Miles, and that makes, like, the conflict within him, and I think pacing the story afterwards, like, it's so nice to see that work, because often I think when they come to villains that then have a redemption arc, it kind of comes out of nowhere for me. But, like, because it made so much sense within the story, and because it was such a personal connection between Miles and the Prowler, that's what made said redemption at the end and every tense confrontation between the two, like, work really well. And on top of that, just like the Prowler's theme, fucking iconic. It's so good. I love that. Like, it, you know, as for me being a fan of music, like, it's such a good, intimidating theme that adds to the mystique of his character.
Are we talking about that, like, screeching sound? That, like, it's like a screech, right? Or, like, it's like this. I don't know how to describe it. It's like strings being shoved together
It's
into, like,
a low wave synthesizer.
Is it a synthesizer?
It's a synth. It's a very well made synth with a very interesting tonality, which I do believe really did add to the theme. Very wonderful. You're right.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, Brooke, on the Kingpin being the main antagonist overall was a really good choice, because I agree with pretty much everything that you said, and I'm not really gonna, you know, reiterate it. But yeah, like it like the whole, like, Spider-Verse takes what Spider-Man 3 did, and that is balance its villains really, really well. Like, each villain knows its place. It doesn't, like, they don't try to overshadow each other, and it moves from one nice plot beat to another. It kind of feels like Doc Ock is the villain in Act 1, then Prowler in Act 2, and then finally Kingpin in Act 3. However, it doesn't build itself up that way. Each of them are each introduced and progressed naturally through the story. But that's kind of my kind of observation on it. Brooke, do you want to elaborate on that, or?
No, it's about it. I'm very happy with the movie. I love it very much. I kind of forgot that Green Goblin is in it. Every time I watch it, I'm like, oh fuck yeah! But it's because he also dies, like, right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Does he die? I thought he was just, like, defeated, quote unquote.
Well, he never comes back, and he is quite massive. I think he literally gets crushed by the machine falling apart.
So,
He might as well be dead.
We know. Yeah, he's movie dead. Yeah, Gabe's right. I guess, yeah. Just, I think moving forward, I like it's hard to. I guess, what am I trying to say? Like, Spider-Verse still to this day, and I don't know if I've said it in previous podcast episodes or if maybe that's just an offhand thing, but SpiderVerse sets such a high expectation for a lot of Spider-Man content moving forward. And
for a lot of content in general moving forward, in my opinion.
Fair enough, yeah. And I think villain-wise, however they're going to carry that momentum into the next one, I'd love to see it, because if they kind of capture that same kind of momentum that they've been doing with SpiderVerse and they translate that into the next one, I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to excel at it. Like, if they meet their standard, then they're going to do amazing. But sorry, was someone going to comment?
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, I really hope in both like the next Spider-Verse movie and just any coming Spider-Man projects, I hope like they just really work on the villains, because like I've always loved Spider-Man villains. I love the Raimi trilogy. I don't need to talk about how much I love the Raimi trilogy. I've done that a million times. But I do feel like in both No Way Home and Spider-Verse 2, like they have Spider-Verse set like definitely a high bar for like upcoming villains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that's should be it with Spider-Verse. I'm looking forward to Spider-Verse 2. But anyway, I guess next in the case studies is Marie-Soleil.
Hello.
Is she still eating pretzels?
The pretzels have been taken away from me because we ordered food.
You're welcome.
So I have been sitting here wondering if I want to go through two different villains, I guess. I don't know if the first one is a villain, but I love him and I'm going to talk about him instead. So, comic book fans, Green Lantern fans, anybody in the conversation, Green Lantern fans?
I love the mythos. I'm not familiar with any stories.
Okay. What about the Red Lantern? So Lantern is powered by rage.
Which one is the Rock in? Or like, am I thinking about the Rock there?
I'm not sure, but the Red Lantern core, their rings are made with some form of magic, space magic and such, but they are powered by rage. They replace the heart of their wearer and cannot be removed without killing the person with the ring, being with the ring. Now, the Lantern Corp that I want to talk about is Dex Starr, spelled Dexstarr. He is a house cat from the planet Earth and is among the deadliest of the Red Lantern Corps.
Okay, wait, hold up. Holy shit. Okay, all right. I'm on board. I had to sit in thought and marinate with that for a second.
Give context.
Yeah.
I don't think any context is needed. Obviously she's going to elaborate, but like
No context. Just keep going.
okay.
Oh, it's
yeah,
just
go.
a cat. It's a cat wearing a ring.
Okay, go.
I was going to send a picture in the chat.
Does it like wear it as a collar? Like,
so like they said, the rings replace their hearts.
so it's Iron Man.
Is this gonna be grotesque? I hope so.
No.
God. Okay, let's
It's
just
adorable.
let her speak. Let her speak.
And he was the runt of the litter, adopted, and when his owner's house was broken into, he claws the burglar, which causes the burglar to cry out, wakes up the owner, who tries to get help but is killed by the burglars. And then when the police show up the next day, Dexter is kicked out of his house because they don't realize that he lives there. And then he lives on the street for a couple of years until he gets picked up by a couple kids off the street, stuck in a bag, and they throw him off a bridge.
Excuse me.
Holy shit.
Yeah, he's got his tragic backstory.
Also, I would like to correct myself. I was thinking of the Black Adam movie. I was not thinking about Green Lantern. That's my bad.
That makes sense.
Got it.
So a red lantern ring is flying by and latches on to this furry ball of rage. And he is the deadliest one of the Red Lanterns. He took out... So Lobo has a pet dog. And without breaking a sweat, Dex Starr takes out this dog. Very much embarrassing for Lobo.
Holy shit.
At one point.
I love this.
Yeah.
So the cat capped a dog. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Keep going. Who else does he cap?
So I'm just gonna read. So the Lantern Corps each have an oath. This is the oath of the Red Lantern. With blood and rage, crimson red, ripped from a corpse so freshly dead, together with our hellish hate, we'll burn you all. This is your fate.
Jesus Christ. It's amazing to me that like it's truly amazing to me how like creative this is.
So wait, is the cat like? Can the cat speak English? Like, how does it take the oath? Does it like meow it or like what? Does it go like meow 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 meow, and then like it purrs at the end? Like, is that like how does this work?
To understand that, you have to understand the Red Lantern a bit more. So the Red Lantern Corps were forged by a
Yes.
Atrocitus.
I think the cat killed her.
Sorry, I had to get help pronouncing words.
What was it? Sorry?
Atrocitus forged the Red Lanterns because of the rage he felt when he was imprisoned and he wasn't given justice by the Guardians of the Universe.
Right.
So, but the Red Lantern, when you get the Red Lantern ring, it destroys who you were as a person, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It replaces your heart, your blood turns to the Red Lantern plasm, and Red Lanterns can like vomit up this plasm, which is kind of like acidic, and it's kind of devastating. But this also gives beings who didn't have the power to speak the power to communicate. One of my favorite lines from Dex Starr: "I find one who hurt you. I kill. I good kitty." About him hunting down the burglars that killed his original owner.
Oh my god.
He is adorable and so full of rage and will annihilate anyone who gets in his way.
Yeah. Oh my god. I obviously can't speak for you, Marie-Soleil, but I can kind of understand to a degree why this was probably a mention, because this is such a creative idea.
It is
like,
so creative, and
it's so creative, yeah.
And like, yeah, there's the tragic backstory, but like, at this point, he's kind of become like, there's no way to save him. A Blue Lantern is the only one that can take the Red Lantern's ring from them without killing them, but then, like, he'd just be a house cat that like is
that committed several murders.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my god. That is so hella cool. I love that. That's probably the more unique villains that we've talked about so far. And I think like probably the ones in my own recent memory, actually. Holy shit.
Yeah.
A talking Red Lantern kitty. That's sweet.
They'll definitely, if they ever make, I'm pretty sure, wasn't there a Green Lantern movie or show? There was a show.
Yep. There's an animated series.
You know the movie, the Hollywood producers are like, let's get that fucking cat in. We can sell toys to the kids and make a lot of fucking money.
I'm pretty sure there's a Green Lantern dog.
Oh, even better.
People, and he's a good guy.
Look, DC, if you're listening to this, you really need to sign on this, because y'all aren't doing so well.
Yeah.
But that's,
yes, sir.
Come on, DC, get it together. Come on.
If you want to experiment with your creative properties, this is where you go. We've already kind of fucked up a lot of other things.
Bro, everyone talks about DC, but y'all know CD?
Oh my god. Okay.
I'm not falling for that.
And that's all.
I'm not falling for it.
And that's all for that. All right.
CD's nuts.
Oh my god.
I didn't see that coming. That's funny.
Oh my god.
I'm like, where's he going with this? I kind of wanted him to go.
Jesus Christ.
I knew exactly where he was
I
going.
knew where he was going to. That's why I was trying to move
the first
on.
time I've heard about it, honestly.
All right. I guess Marie-Soleil, if there isn't anything else you want to touch on when it comes to Dex Starr, we can then move on.
There's not really much else to go into unless I talk into the specific battles he fought. Like he fought in the Blackest Night and everything. Like he was there for those, and his creation was originally supposed to be a joke. But
fair enough. Yeah, that's such a creative idea. I love that.
Yeah,
like it's one thing to have like a kind of like Thanos. Like a Thanos visual threat where it's like obviously like a 9-foot hulking figure, and then you just have like an ordinary house cat that becomes like the deadliest fucking presence in the universe. That's amazing. I applaud that. For anyone listening, for like any writers who are listening and who have been keeping up, like try to be more creative with your villains. Make a fucking dinner fork your main antagonist. I'd love to see that. But yeah, with all that being said, as we are talking about complexities of villains, let's touch on the Joker, and I'll let Tyler take it away from here.
I'll be honest, I'm not going to speak too much to his complexity.
I was just leading in. You can go.
So. I'm more going to talk on comic book Joker, which I know we've had a lot of comics and supers, but they're so popular right now, I just have to trash them. I'll be talking about comic Joker, mostly, though I'm going to touch on the newest movie and a bit in DC in general. As I stated previously, there are kind of 4 types of villains. There's your ultimate evil, your natural, your reasonable, and your mentally ill. Joker obviously kind of falls into your mentally ill category. My girlfriend is pointing at me and looks excited. What is it, darling?
the Joker's not insane. He's super sane. That's his ability.
Oh, she's talking about some headcanon that she developed from reading too many fan fictions. 1 second.
Excuse me, super sane?
I'm not. Nope. This is my bit. You had the mic. No, you can do those grabby hands all you want. I ain't giving it up.
Oh dear.
All right.
Joker, the Super Saiyan.
So, you can type it up in the chat, darling. So. He is classified as criminally insane. He is mentally ill and is made into a villain because of it. And this is a problem I find with a lot of villains. We go from him to Deadpool to even to some extent Kingpin, as mentioned earlier, who is, yes, a villain, but his mental illness in that case is grief, as opposed to any type of psychosis or schizophrenia. And if we're looking at the Joker, he did some almost comical crimes when things were started. He robbed banks at the start, and in things like, I believe it was The Long Halloween, and that initial Batman trilogy is when he truly started to get his super villain-esque act going. But again, we're talking about someone who's mentally insane, and if we're going to go off some terminology that society has wronged. If he had, gotten actual help, and if the caretakers had done their duty and not pinned him with a psychiatrist that ended up falling in love with him, maybe some things would have gone a little differently. Now, I'm not condoning any actions.
Is that Harley Quinn?
Harley Quinn was his initial psychiatrist. Yes, Harleen Quinzel. Okay. Yeah. The different villain I was debating touching on as well, but I digress. So the Joker is criminally insane. Again, we're villainizing mental illness. And I do not think the Joker is a good villain. I never have. His plots and stuff like that initially, and I'm talking again, older comics are, as I said, robbing banks, taking the money away from giant corporations and all this jazz, which now that I'm a grown-up millennial who's very anti-capitalist, I can get behind 100%. I'm a bit mentally ill myself here and there. Thanks, depression. You're my favorite girl. And taking away the money from greater corporations is one of the things I strive to do in life. I try not to support any of them as best I can, because that capitalism is, in my opinion, what's kind of wrecking society. But, and here's where I get back to the Joker being a bad villain, he was trying to dismantle that in his own way. Robbing banks, causing disruptions, and all this jazz. Because if you rob a bank, you're not going to hurt the people that the bank is supporting. The bank has insurance to cover those people. You're literally just hurting the industry and the corporation itself.
Right.
People start to sympathize with that. And again, this goes back to a point I've mentioned. And I straight up started to sympathize with Joker. And then, in the last 20 years, he became abusive. He was always manipulative. He manipulated Harley into falling for him with his charisma, but he never hit her. And he never threatened her that much. He was, honestly, the two of them in the Mad Love arc, is when I believe this first started, were an okay, insane couple, though she was manipulated. And then because bank robberies weren't doing it anymore, the writers had to be like, okay, how do we make the Joker a villain again? Let's give him this. And so they made him very, very openly and overtly abusive. And it's again one of those examples where you can't have your audience sympathize too much. You can't have them be, oh, this is an anti-capitalist, mentally unwell person. Look at that. But we're going to make him hit his girlfriend, so you have to hate him because you can't side with that person, right? Right? You can't side with that person. And I don't side with that. But once again, if we're talking about symptoms of mental illness, his manipulation and his abusive behavior is probably symptoms of that. So when I'm looking at the Joker taking away the fact that, you know, he tried to bomb Gotham City, and I'm talking, again, origin story and early, is he really a villain? Or is he just some mentally unwell guy that has been put into these situations without any support? And I like the new Joker movie because it kind of touches on that quite a bit. How the system is failing mentally unwell people and supporting, you know, the billionaires and the like, as opposed to those of us that might actually need some of this support. And the fact that they did bring in Thomas Wayne and that whole big arc in the latest Joker movie was sublime. Absolutely sublime. I have my qualms with it. But to rebring Joker from his comic book parlor trick shenanigans back in the day into the 20th century, I believe it was perfect. It was the perfect way to do it. And that's something I have to say about DC in general. DC does dark and psychological really well. And then they also do cartoons really well. Like I like some of their Justice League adaptations. Very good. They should stop trying to do the live action Justice League and trying to compete with Marvel. They can't. Marvel's won. Terribly sorry. Stick with your fucking guns.
They should definitely do more of Joker, because I wouldn't mind a Joker movie, but with the Punisher. Is the Punisher DC, or am I just? I don't know any of this shit.
It's Marvel.
Like, he's Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck. Who am I thinking of? Never mind.
I can't really add much to the conversation because the only Joker thing related I've watched is like the Joker movie, but like I don't think it paints him as a villain that well. Just more so just like a relatable individual and like humanizes him.
I think they put him as half and half villain, half I don't want to say relatable, but you kind of get the systems fail him. What I also really like spoilers, obviously, if you haven't seen it, it's fucking 2021. But it's like, I like it that he created his own downfall, because some of the guys, when he started that riot, they end up killing, what's his name? Thomas Wayne, which then led to the creation of Batman. I thought that was kind of cool. So it's not all angst and edgy. There was, which is good, but it led to his own. He created his own downfall, which I was like, that's kind of sick.
I think therein lies the key thing that has been very noticeable with a lot of villains lately, and Tyler could expand more on this, but I think with a lot of villains nowadays, there is just a single word that ties a lot of the more notable ones together, and that is sympathy. How characters, or like how villains and their methods are portrayed is one thing, but suddenly when you add in sympathetic reasons, such as in the Joker, where the system is failing everyone and only really benefiting things, it's hurting the majority and benefiting the minority, that obviously sympathizes with a lot of people, and it's a very real world message that a lot of people can understand outside of the film. It doesn't really take a lot of nuance to understand that, but therein lies a real complexity when it comes to sympathy, because just how far can you push that? Because Tyler's right, like you can have, like, there can be sympathy within your story and especially within your villains, but suddenly when everyone is sympathizing with the wrong message, that's probably where it becomes a problem. That's when it becomes a problem. Like,
and it all depends on which message.
Like, to touch on a recent example too, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Is everyone familiar with it, or does anyone plan on watching it?
I watched it.
So Alex has watched it. Everyone else?
I watched it.
Brooke has watched it.
I watched most of it. I still haven't watched the final episode, but I know what happens, so I'm not with spoilers.
Is anyone
Honestly, I haven't watched it, but knowing me, I'm probably like hear all the spoilers first and then watch it. And like, yeah, so,
I don't care.
So the main themes around Falcon and the Winter Soldier dives really deep into racism and systems of oppression, very real topics within the world, especially right now, and how most of the oppressors' sympathy kind of is channeled towards is through the character John Walker, a very privileged, very American character that's mostly everyone, a lot of people fucking hate, because for in the beginning he started off as just Cap's replacement, but then as the series continued, and I applaud the series for really handling this sensitive material really well, he became everything that the oppressor was, white privilege. He became all of that to an extent. Meanwhile,
not to an extent. I think they did a really good job of capturing the white male American privilege stuff. There were some that were suddenly starting to sympathize with that, which is not what you should be sympathizing with, because a lot of not to get very political on this podcast, because that's not what the podcast is, but basically my point is, getting what a message across is one thing, but suddenly when the message is so very clearly wrong and somehow people are still sympathizing with that is in itself, I think, a really interesting case study.
Are you saying that robbing banks as a mentally ill person is wrong? I think I have to rechange my career path, everyone.
Oh wait, you're not supposed to rob people? Oh God, I have a lot of
well, there goes our
Willikers.
Guys, there goes our plan later after the podcast is done.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, Darren. Yeah, it's off. It's off. No, it's off.
But genuinely, do people actually like sympathize with John Walker?
There was a lot of discourse, like maybe not inadvertently, maybe not directly, but I know indirectly. So to bring up an example that I saw on TikTok of all places, there was a content.
Well, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Just to
Talk. Wait. Can we? Okay. Let me distinguish. Is it shit posting, or is it like an actual opinion?
No, it's an actual thing. So there is a black content creator by the name of Straw Hat Goofy who has been highlighting a lot of the kind of undertones and themes that Falcon and the Winter Soldier was doing through, as each episode was releasing, and he was pointing out a lot of the racism that the show was touching on. And so many of the content, like so many commenters were gaslighting him, saying that it wasn't too deep, that he shouldn't be looking too far into this, when the show itself was very evident with these themes. To suddenly not think, for him to suddenly, like for these people to suddenly look past that and just gaslight this creator was kind of bullshit, because that just means that the themes of the show weren't hitting with these commenters.
They were like not subtle at all, like
No.
in the show either. Like there's that image of him standing with the shield with like the blood splatter up. Like you're not supposed to root for this dude.
No. And to a similar degree, you're not supposed to root for the Joker, just to tie it back into Tyler's case study. Like to a certain degree, you're not supposed to. But
I like it. I obviously don't go fucking blowing out Jimmy Kimmel's brain and stabbing stockbroker guys, but I thought the whole message of the Joker was like, if you don't invest in mental health and these economic equality, you're gonna get people shooting up Jimmy Kimmel's place and fucking burning. And that's what happened when there was a protest class riots. They were fucking like burning up every CNN and all these corporations.
It's certainly an extreme example of that.
So it's kind of like, don't make sure you invest in mental health, or that this is the outcome. You will become a third world country.
Yeah,
which is what happened at the end of the Joker.
Yeah.
Isn't what Charbel talking like the same like things people said as like, oh, we should not allow the Joker to be in movies. It'll influence our kids.
Yeah, fuck those guys.
That's a whole other conversation, and we can get into that once we're planning to do a social issues episode soon, but I think to kind of hand it off to Tyler to finish off his case study, what do you kind of make of everything that we had been talking about?
Well, it's always trouble making a sympathetic villain, and the Joker was a prime example of that. And there are plenty of other examples, and something I challenge everyone to do is to look at those reasonable villains and see where and this is just a general moniker, act of violence lies. If you're thinking, oh, they're so reasonable, why are they a villain? And then the writers throw in this act. I challenge you to actually think if that act is in character, because a lot of the time you'll find it's not. It is just a way to make you see a villain. And it's a very type of subtle manipulation. And I'm not going to get too conspiracy theorist with this. But my second challenge then is, if you're writing a villain and you're trying to make a reasonable villain and you start siding with them a bit, don't do that. Don't be, how can I make this person a villain? Don't follow that trend and see where it takes you. See if this villain actually is as such, or if your hero might be in the wrong. It can lead to some much more interesting stories where we realize that the villains might not be people, because every villain who ever started is pretty sure they were doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more like a lot of villains nowadays are very complex with their thinking, and that's credit to the writers, right? But I guess moving on to our next case study, let's take it back to a time where villains were not necessarily as complex as they are now, but they certainly weren't anything to mess around with either. And I'm referencing specifically Star Wars, where villains can be as complex as they can be, but they're also to a degree, they're also still fairly simple in the sense that they're the bad guy that the hero needs to defeat. So I'll hand it off to Marcus to discuss the villains of Star Wars.
So if you've been paying attention, my Discord name is Palpatine's Manicured Nails. So that might have been a little spoiler for you if you're watching this on YouTube. So how I define Palpatine, especially when we're talking in that whole, what do you call it? The graph, the chart, the conflict chart.
I guess just the conflict chart. So there's the 9 different levels of conflict. How would I think if we're talking about Palpatine, in extension, we're talking about the whole empire as the whole empire. So I'm assuming it'd be like man versus society, or would it be like man versus man low key, or like I'm not too sure how that would fall. So like if anyone wants to help me with that, please do. I think
what Palpatine?
Okay, obviously like Palpatine versus Luke, that's man versus man. But like if we're talking like Palpatine and the whole empire as a whole, then isn't that like
Palpatine as a
society?
As a representation of a thing, as a representation of the empire, it would be man versus society.
No, the Senate. He wants to get rid of democracy in a way and take full control himself.
Yeah. So the main characteristics I define Palpatine as is like a very manipulative, silver-tongued is the right word. Very manipulative, silver-tongued, following silver-tongued, opportunistic, very patient. I don't think that's a topic. I don't think that's a characteristic we've defined in villains. But like, I do think a lot. Very good villains are very patient with what they want to achieve. But then at the same time, once they see the opportunity come, they'll strike at it at like a moment's haste. You know.
Yeah.
So Palpatine, the Emperor, and extension Vader. Vader was a product of smooth talking, silver talking with Palpatine, who implemented himself, seeing the opportunity as becoming like a father figure, and obviously gaslighting the hell out of this like really young guy. He's like, "You're gonna be the strongest person I've ever met," or like that whole deal.
Right.
And his entire philosophy as a whole was just to bring back this whole Sith Empire, and obviously the Sith Empire is like basic shit. It's just like, oh, we want to dominate the universe, oppression, blah 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 blah. You're not the droids we're looking for, etc., etc., etc. I think in comparison to like modern villains of today, I don't think he's that complex. Granted, if you do take a grasp within like the whole thing that Disney's trying to do with like revamping everything and turning the whole already established universe into legends and trying to reestablish a new thing, they're trying to make him more complex. But at the same time, I don't think there was anything that relatable with Palpatine, because he like his backstory pretty much is that like he was born into a rich family, and then this guy who's like in charge of some faction, he was like, "Oh, I like you," and then Loki's like, "I'm actually a Sith Lord, and now you're my apprentice," and like he was just teaching this kid like things, but like there wasn't anything established to be sympathetic towards Palpatine, and I'm pretty sure that's why I've always considered him as just like my true definition of a villain.
Right.
Like, there's nothing sympathetic about manipulating teenagers to do your will. There's nothing to sympathize with the fact that you pretty much start a war and then you and then use that war as like your upbringing to like a higher position.
I am the Senate is sympathetic because I want to be the Senate.
I'm pretty sure.
That's a stretch.
All
like,
power in my hands.
I'm pretty sure he just wanted, like, he was just doing what he was told, or like he was doing what he was taught.
Wasn't there also wasn't there a scene where he talks shit about the Congress when it's like him and Anakin? It's that scene where they talk about Darth whatever.
Oh,
There's a part where he
do
mentions.
you know
The
the story
tragedy of Darth Plagueis the
Wise?
Yeah.
I remember before that there was something where he mentions. He's like, look at all these guys just fucking bickering and muttering amongst themselves.
Because he manifested a war to happen, and then he was using the tension of the war to push the fact that I should be emperor, or like I should be like supreme high to like stop this war. When in reality, he was the one who started the war in the first place.
Yeah,
like behind the scenes. Right. So like then like again, like that's something you can't sympathize with. Like, yeah, I would totally like start a war just to like, you know, get a higher position in my company or something like that. Like like obviously if you're into that, you're obviously insane. But like I don't see anything sympathetic with him. And like from all the villains that we've listed, there are at least one characteristic to be sympathetic for. This man literally manipulated everyone he could and like gaslight the shit out of them.
Yeah.
to the point where like he got what he wanted, and like pretty much, I don't know. Like that's like the only thing I could say to connect everything is like at the end of the quote unquote original trilogy, when like they try killing him, it's the guy who like really did everything. It's not this past version that we mentioned with Thanos. It's the established villain, and like he'll do anything he wants, and he'll fucking backstab the people that he like gaslighted, and like he'll walk up to his apprentice's son and be like, you look pretty cool and quirky to me. How about you become my new apprentice? And like backstab the shit out of Vader. Like so like I don't really know what else I can sympathize with him, but like I guess that's just open discussion at this point.
I think that's the point. And I say that because when it comes to villains like Palpatine, it's almost as if there isn't it's almost as if sympathetic qualities aren't really necessary. It fits more like Palpatine, as I've always imagined him as growing up. He's always just been the first example of what Tyler was saying about villain types, just a big bad. And to be honest, I don't know if there anything like I don't know if like Disney or Lucasfilm or whoever really needs to expand on that anymore, because the thing is, when it comes like, as Marcus, as you were speaking, as Palpatine is obviously like this huge evil and with zero redeeming qualities, I think that's probably the point, because that's an easier sell for people to, or that's an easier sell for a lot of general audiences for a protagonist to defeat. And when you're at such a young age, because Star Wars is inadvertently just a franchise that was set up for kids.
Kid show, by the way.
Yeah, you don't need to have moral complexities for such young audiences yet. You don't need to introduce sympathetic qualities just so soon. Like, you can probably do that later with other villains when there's more, like when brains are more fully developed and we can understand that. But if you just want to, if there are just kids in the theater who just want to see a good guy defeat a bad guy, that is simple enough, I think, with Palpatine. Like, Luke embodies hope, Palpatine embodies evil, and it's a classic good versus evil story. Like, you don't need to have like the kind of moral complexities that we would better understand as adults. That is for later. That is for when we look back at these movies and understand just how fucked up Palpatine is. But for a lot of general audiences, they don't analyze it as much as we do to a degree. Like, we understanding of storytelling tropes and pacing and whatever, we understand how these structures are meant to work. But for other audiences, they just want to see a good guy defeat a bad guy. And Palpatine is the bad guy in Star Wars.
Writer's curse.
Yeah.
If I may throw in a bit, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. I've read almost every one of the books that is collectively now legends. Thanks, Disney. I'm gonna kill that fucking mouse. I know quite a bit.
I literally just got the Darth Plagueis book from like a bookstore a while back. But
Hell
bro,
yeah.
I still need to finish the Darth Bane trilogy because I really want to finish that one.
Well, and it's interesting that you now brought up Darth Vane. So sorry to go on a nerd tangent.
Yeah,
here, but
no. You and me are vibing. We're on the same spectrum. Continue.
If we're talking about Palpatine specifically, he's honestly, in my opinion, the perfect Sith Lord. He is a culmination of perfect Sith values that have been handed down since Darth Bane, including the rule of 2 Sith Lords. And I love the fact that you brought up his patience, because his patience is phenomenal. Years this man spent in the political field working his way towards that goal. Like, we look at Kylo Ren and Snoke and that bullshit in the latest
Fuck
trilogy.
those guys.
Yeah, fuck that.
Hey, don't spoil it. I haven't watched the last one yet. I haven't watched it yet.
You're not missing much,
You're
I'll
not
be
missing
honest.
much.
It's okay.
And they are so quick to the point. Oh, we have to do the kill. We have to do this. But Palpatine was slow, methodical poison. And the fact that you brought up his patience is so true. And I do think that something Disney has definitely missed out on with a lot of villains, period, is that insinuation that Palpatine and, of course, Plagueis and Bane, all before them, had about that really creeping spread of corruption. And I'm glad somebody did bring up the talk in the opera between Anakin and Palpatine, is that is a perfect example of how the Sith were operating at that time period in Star Wars. They didn't have an army of troops that were the original species of the Sith fighting against the galaxy. They had their subversions. And Palpatine was a wonderful example of that, while still being the archetype of, oh, this is the big bad evil guy. He's not necessarily complex personally,
Right.
but his methods are, and his methods are good. His motivation is, oh, look, he's evil, but look at how he does it. And that, to me, you're right, was a very good villain.
Those are all great villain traits.
I think especially like now that I'm older and I'm seeing all these media sources that depict villains, and they always have like this super tragic backstory or whatever, like all these aspects to be sympathetic, like for example, Kingpin and his family. The Prowler is literally just like, he was in that because it was just the life he had to do to survive, but then it suddenly took him over, etc. Like, when I think of Palpatine, I just think, oh, big scary bad dude who shoots lightning out of his fingers. I don't see anything else to like be like that hurts my head too much when I think about it. I can distinguish perfectly, like, this is a bad guy, this is a villain. And like, I think honestly that's the model I compare to when I watch or I read or like anything. If I see a villain, I'm like, are they good as Palpatine? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, you know, like we had kind of been touching on already, Palpatine really does embody a lot of what makes a villain. Like for general audiences and for people who just want to watch a good guy defeat a bad guy, like I've said, Palpatine is the bad guy. But for people who have grown up with Star Wars or are very invested in Star Wars, like Tyler and Marcus, once you understand a lot more about his story, there is still so much to pick away at him, despite being maybe not complex by today's standards, but there is still a lot to him. Like, you guys had been bringing up his patience. Like, I am not familiar with any other kind of villain who is like that personally, who thinks and works like that. Like, that's pretty much new information to me.
Just one more thought on Palpatine that I just had, which you were talking about how he's your archetypal villain, and it's a very good one, because we have to remember Palpatine didn't have to do any of what he did. Palpatine was rich and posh and could go into politics and live a perfectly fine life. He did not have to do any of that. He didn't have to make the Empire. He didn't have to be evil, didn't have to corrupt anyone, didn't have to kill the Jedi. Straight up, didn't have to. Why? He was bad. Done. End of story. And that's
Well,
a good way to
that
do no
shit.
complexity. Very much is a very good way
I
to do it.
like that shit so much, where it's like the villain is just bad from the beginning. Because
Yeah.
I do like, and I get the tragic backstory, and they're doing this as revenge, but I do like the idea of this person is just born evil. Just either society or just his very essence was born evil. I've always liked those kind of villains myself.
Yeah, it's always a nice contrast too, right? Like we live in an age where, well, a lot of us grew up with a lot of archetypal villains, but not very complex ones. But then suddenly now the turn is very complex villains, but not very simple ones. I think that's the way I'm trying to say it. Like there is still, there are still enough things that make villains, but a lot of people nowadays are striving to have that tragic backstory or have those very askewed motivations, when sometimes we don't really need that. Like I can admit personally that when you have a whole bunch of complex villains, suddenly no one is. It's that thing. It's that syndrome quote from The Incredibles: when everyone's super, no one is. Does anyone else agree? Or am I just sounding dumb?
I do get it. I do also think there's I want to take issue with the phrasing "born evil," because I think that has problematic connotations. But I do agree that people put way too much effort into tragic backstories and shit. Sometimes people are just bad people, and that's just who they are.
Yeah, no, not born.
Yeah,
I think it definitely depends on the story, but the type of story too. Like Star Wars is like a space opera. It's a space story, but it's written sort of like a classic fantasy story. So I think it definitely makes more sense in a story like that to have the villain be Palpatine, who's just he just wants to take over because he's just a bad guy. He's a bad guy. He's a bad Sith. He just wants to take over the galaxy because he just wants to be evil and laugh. And honestly, he's right and should say it.
That's also another interesting thing you bring up, though, Gabe, is what makes a good villain depends on the genre and the setting of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And the characteristics of the genre.
If you try to throw a character with Palpatine's depth into a story, if you have something that's more dark fantasy, or something that's a thriller, a Hannibal Lecter story,
Imagine taking Hannibal Lecter and Palpatine and switching them and plopping them into each other's stories. It's not gonna work.
No,
just murdered a bunch of one by one the senators.
Well, not even just murder, but just complexity. A character with Hannibal Lecter's complexity doesn't really have a place in a space, except for Clone Wars is the exception because Clone Wars is Kino, right. But for just the original trilogy, it's really just a good versus evil story, and the villain. I mean, I guess it really depends on whether or not you qualify Darth Vader or Palpatine as the villain of those. But if we're strictly on Palpatine, Palpatine doesn't need to be very complex because he's just the big bad. He's like the Sauron. Trying to give Palpatine complexity would be like giving Sauron complexity. It's not necessary. You don't need to do that.
What do you mean Sauron's not complex? Hold on.
We're just gonna ignore the Silmarillion and not think about it right now.
Yeah, right. I was about to
I've not read the Silmarillion. I'm not going to.
You really should. You really fucking should.
I probably should. My point is, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, though, Sauron, maybe I'm sure he has complexities in the Silmarillion. I'll grant that he probably has complexities in other Lord of the Rings stories, but in just I've only seen the movies. I don't know if Sauron is very deep in the books, but in the movies at the very least, Sauron is just he's just a big evil menace. And for a story like that, I think a villain doesn't really have to necessarily be an overwhelming personal struggle with the protagonist. They are an evil that represents an evil darkness to the hero's good. But then in a story like Hannibal, which is a more grounded and realistic thriller, you don't like in real life things aren't as usually there are exceptions, but like things are usually not as simple as like this is just a good guy and this is just a bad guy. And Hannibal Lecter is definitely a bad guy, and I'm not saying that he's like he was right in killing and eating people. That's I think we can all agree that's not very cash money. But
Are you blaming the mentally ill for killing and eating people now?
I am blaming the actions of a fictional character. But like Hannibal Lecter is like a much more complex character than just I like eating people. Tastes yummy. And
I agree.
Like those complexities wouldn't have they don't really fit in like a
big
that
log
kind of
for
that makes sense.
for adults and kids.
Thinking
well,
about
not just adults and kids, but just like a good versus evil story. Like if you're trying to tell a story about good versus evil, it would sort of muddle what would muddy the waters. It would muddy the waters to have like what is evil really being thrown into question. Because in stories like that, it's like evil is evil. There's no need to like go like get really deep about it. Like a one guy just wants to take over the universe is just evil.
Right.
Well, fuck. This is kind of what I was getting back to way back then about not really the world, but it's sort of a tipping scale, multiple scales of like how someone, I don't want to say born evil, but what I meant is like some of it could be Palpatine's attitude that he naturally is just an ambitious character who is power hungry and will do whatever it takes to get past. That's just how he is. That's just how it could be he's born that way, or it could be cultural, political, mental health, whatever. That's the complexity of a good villain, is that you can tackle why they're evil from so many different angles. If the villain's reason they're evil is capitalism, they have a tragic backstory, that's not a good villain to me. I want to get really deep with the character. I want to be chilling with them and analyzing every angle from them about why are they like this. It's not about sympathy, it's more about empathy. They're trying to understand why do they think this way, and in essence that's kind of the lesson of like, oh, the world made him like this, or the character became like this, and this is why you should try to fix that. You should try to get away from this. You know what I mean? Those are good villains where they have multiple angles of how they became evil, which I like.
Right. And to close off this section, I guess like just because we say, or just because, I've said, and maybe some other people have said that Palpatine may not be as complex as some other villains nowadays, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have any depth, because he is still a complex character. He does still have his own motivations, and he does still have his own goals. But I guess basically, yeah, like Gabe and pretty much everyone else had been saying, like, it just depends on the story. But I guess, yeah, that's kind of our thing on Palpatine. I guess, Charbel, since you were speaking last time, why don't you close it off? Or why don't we catch it? How am I trying to transition into this? I've lost transitions.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, let's get on to your case study then to help wrap up the episode, because we've been recording for quite a while, and I think let's just finish off with yours.
Okay, I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been for my entire life. Anyway, I'm going to start off. My villain is basically like Yagami from Death Note, the anime. And I've seen that fucking anime like 5 times. I've seen it in junior high when I was a 13-year-old. I've seen it when I was 16 in high school. Then I saw it again when I was in my 20s. I'm pretty sure I've seen it at least 4 or 5 times. And
classic.
I've been thinking a lot about this character. And I've also been thinking about myself, how I viewed him in my different age group. When I was 13, I was obviously you're a fucking kid. You're more simplistic, like, oh, killing criminals is right, but then now it's bad because Light's corrupted by the power of the Death Note, and he's killing innocent people to protect his ass. That's me as a 13-year-old. As I kind of got deeper, I started thinking more now around my age group. I started thinking about Light as himself. He's this, I don't want to say cocky, but he is still a high schooler. He's a 19-year-old kid. He's really that fully grown up yet in terms of his mental state. He has a very childish mental state, which fits for a normal high schooler. All high schoolers are fucking edgy. And when he gets this, and you maybe could say he's a little bit confident, cocky, because he's the top fucking student of the school. He has all the scholarships. And when he gets this, his ideology sort of came from, it's weird. It started off from him daydreaming in class and just watching the news and seeing all these horrible murders of just like the unimaginable horrors. And he starts thinking about, somehow he got to that way of thinking. They don't, of like, why should these criminals live? It's more the whole talk about the idea of death penalty. Like, what do you do with just the most evil fucking criminals ever? The problem, and I've been going back and forth on it, where it's like, well, are they, some people would say, well, they're not humans anymore because of the horrors they did. And I'm like, well, now you've given an authority the power to classify what is human and what isn't human. And that's what the Nazis did with the Jews. So he's always been a guy where another big thing is, it's the first time where I noticed a protagonist can be the bad guy. As a little kid, that tripped me out. And I've always loved stories where it starts where the main character seems like the good guy, and over time he gets corrupted either by just the way he sees the world or what he sees in the world and stuff like that. I've always liked that, as you are seeing the development of a villain through light side. And I've always liked in other series where if I see a villain, depending on the genre, obviously, I want to see how they got there. What's their way of thinking? What's the events of their life that they got there? I don't want a simple 2D answer, ironically, about that.
Yeah, like to a degree, what would you do if you could play God? Like I say to a degree because obviously that's, you know, I don't even think it's really it is sort of the God mentality, and it's also about how the power corrupts. That this kid Light himself created this God mentality himself. I think,
and it's kind of like
I think it's more like what I was trying to get at. Like instead of some kind of God complex is judge, jury, and executioner complex, something more along those lines.
Well, that's what he is. And for me, as I got older, I jumped back and forth on this topic, and I kind of got down to the point of, no, I am not. I don't like the idea of the death penalty. The more I thought about it in my life growing up with this series, I fucking love this show. It's sort of nostalgic because it's my first anime, but every time I went back to it, the older I've got, I've always found more layers of meaning and depth to it. And I found it that it's a messy. I don't like the idea of giving government authority to decide who dies based on the most horrendous crimes ever. And basically what you should do is these worst criminals, they should just fucking stay locked up. Throw them in a concrete home with solitary confinement, throw away the key. And that's honestly the best way, because life's worse than death at this point.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of how I looked at it.
Yeah, like shit, I forgot what I was gonna say. I think it's more like, okay, no, I remember now. So when it comes to these, you know, as it's kind of a nice contrast because, you know, with Marcus, we were touching on like the kind of, you know, not every villain always needs to be complex and sympathetic, but when we look at villains like Yagami, that is where it is so fascinating looking at these complexities, because you're right, like Light starts off justified in thinking he is a hero, like he is doing good for humanity by at first getting rid of like dangerous people that would hurt other people. A lot of people, especially when they're so young, have a very pre-established moral system that could probably sympathize with that. Like you're getting rid of all the bad people, like that's a pretty good thing, right? Like
most kids would think like that. The bad guy should just get rid of.
It's trading one life for the lives of everyone else. But suddenly when you really start to analyze it, who gives you that authority? And how are you justified in said authority?
There's one scene, I don't remember who said it. It was one of the random cops, and he asks Elle, because they couldn't figure out how these people are dropping dead. And he asked L, it's like, why are we even chasing after Kira? Half of these criminals are sentenced for death penalty anyways, because death penalty, I think it's still legal in Japan. And L says, they die by the law, not by Kira. And it goes back to what I was thinking, that L believes in the law and the system of having the authority decide when someone would die. And to me, I'm like, and obviously I've seen some podcasts about the people on death row, and they've just on these, I don't know what they are. And unfortunately, they are still human at the end of the day. They've done some horrible things. They're still human, but they should still serve their punishment as, like I said, in solitary confinement for fucking ever. They will never leave prison as a way closure for the victims. It is definitely, whoever wrote it, I don't know, I know they use a fake name. They thought it through. They thought a lot of parts through with that series.
Death Note is like I think it's really good for making you think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You're right, like it brings up so many issues like that, and like you might start out agreeing with Light, and then as things go on, you're like, okay, maybe he's taking it too far, and like it's really good for like making you think about things like that in a different way.
Yeah, he starts to take it too far at the point where he feels threat. He gets the god complexity, and again, he's a kid. He's a high schooler, so he's not developed as an adult yet. So when he gets obsessed with that god complexity, that he's making the world a better place. He's seeing these online posts of people saying, "Thank you, Kira. You killed the person who killed my relative," or whatever. He becomes obsessed with it. And again, it boils down to one of the themes I've always loved about villains is power corrupts. He becomes corrupted with this power, that when L does that public broadcast and he challenges Kira, and then remember the Light kills the puppet, and then L declares war on him. He's like, I can't believe you just killed this guy. And that's when that's the scene. It's like episode 5 is when Light loses his shit. He felt his god complexity threatened, and from there he starts to hunt down the FBI agents. And then from there he starts to hunt down not even criminals on death row, because he's killed most of them. He starts getting murderers, and then there's a point where he starts killing like loners, like people who just like committed fraud. Like, I'm sorry, like do you know what I mean? Like like petty thieves. He starts killing those. And then there's even a point where he wants to kill his own sister to protect his ass. From that scene early on in the show, when he kills that fake L, that's when it's straight downhill from there, and he gets corrupt all the fucking way.
Right.
But here's the thing also, is because he becomes so corrupt and you start questioning his actions, it makes you go back and start thinking, well, was he justified from the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, no, he's not justified, but it's great. It's like, yeah, who knows? Because he always mentions from the very beginning that when he first kills those guys who tried to rape that lady, he always mentions, he's like, there's a part in the sub where he's like, this is what I've been thinking all these last couple of days, is that the world is full of these like evil people and God needs to purge them out. So it's like, they never touched on this, but there's multiple lines where he mentions that he's been having these thoughts of the idea of a God purging all evil before he gets the Death Note. So it's like, how did he get those ways of thinking? Like, I gotta rewatch it. Obviously, it's been a while.
His dad's a cop, that's why.
Yeah, and this is totally off, not really off topic. But when that Hong Kong stuff was going on, I was talking to a guy. He's half Chinese, half Japanese, and he's saying the Japanese have huge respect for authority and law, and lots of disrespect for criminals. For us, we'll watch a show like Breaking Bad and relate to Walter White, or the mobster doing crime, selling heroin to make money for his starving family, even though the heroin addict will ruin his life and his family. In Japan, it doesn't really work that way. There's a lot of disrespect. I don't want to say disrespect to criminals. It's really frowned upon. So they the shows, I don't want to say it's a critique, but it sort of is a critique of the Japanese law system in a weird fucking way.
I think like there's so many things to talk about Death Note, but I think to kind of touch on the one that I'm most fascinated in, and that is the the handling of power. Because like when it comes to a lot of villains, like power seems to always be at the heart of a lot of them. Like Palpatine is a pretty good example of that. Palpatine wants all the power in the universe, but when it comes but it's obvious that said power is bad in the hands of Palpatine because he has been coded as the bad guy from the very beginning. With Light, because he is the protagonist and he is the character that was a lot of people are meant to root for in the beginning, that just means the exploration of power makes it like the exploration of power through the eyes of a protagonist, especially through a protagonist as young and as naive to a degree as Light is. That is such a fascinating like mindset into who is essentially a villain.
Yeah. It's good shit. And it's kind of weird from a writer's perspective. It's if you are writing a story and you're the protagonist as a good guy, you got to add those scenes of like either flashbacks or one-on-one something to show the readers, to show the villains like path of how they got to that point of you. And it's like it makes it good shit because like I'm trying to think of an example. Fuck, who does it? Fuck, I don't know. But it's those are good villains. And definitely Light's been like a big one for me. Not because as a kid seeing the idea that the protagonist could be a bad guy, doesn't always have to be a good guy. That was a big game changer for me as a kid. But also just seeing how complex a villain could be was through Light Yagami. Ever since then, I was like looking. Walter White is a big one where I compared him a lot to Light Yagami because he went through the same thing where he started out as a moral cause, like I'm only selling meth because I need to pay for my cancer treatment. And there's even a scene with Hank where he says like he's like, what about all those people you fucking ruined from meth? And remember, even there's a scene where Walter finds Jesse's girlfriend overdosing on meth. He literally sees the cause of his action of him selling these drugs, and obviously it goes down the hill. And I don't want to get into it. The show just spirals out of control. But Walter White is almost the same thing as like Yagami, where he's justified. You think he's justified at first, and he slowly becomes a villain later on in the show. Yeah, it's not necessarily when a hero becomes a villain, but when your protagonist turns to the dark side. Yeah, because heroes turning into heroes becoming the villain, that is a whole other kind of tangent that we can get into eventually. But when the protagonist, which is by default the character that you're going to be following their journey no matter what, seeing their descent into the dark side is so fascinating when they start off as a likable character. Also, go ahead. I like what you're saying. And it has to start from the character first. You have to give the character a personality that will lead them to becoming a villain. So either that could be like ambitious, selfish, liar. Again, everyone has a sense of morality. But you know what I mean? That the character's personality should make it understandable and believable that they will reach for the bad side. Yeah, like you can certainly insert those traits in initially, but how that character is carried throughout the course of, a movie, a TV show, a video game, or whatever. Like, it is cases like Light Yagami that is so fascinating to look at, because I was like you, Charbel, when I was young and I watched Death Note. Like, it was like, I pretty much echo all the sentiments that you had, and talking about this now, like of a character playing not just a character deciding he alone is judge, jury, and executioner, but just how he handles that power and eventually how it corrupts him is probably making him one of the most unexpected villains, but also one of the most memorable ones. Like, especially for a lot of them. Oh god, man, he's definitely an icon, and like I like anime, but I fucking hate weebs. But he definitely is one of the big weeb trash. He's definitely he's basically a meme. That franchise is iconic. That show is iconic to all of anime. And there's even like for a reason, right? Oh yeah, because it's fucking great. I think people who don't even like anime will enjoy it. It's like Full Metal Alchemist, where if you don't like anime, you'll still enjoy it.
Can I share a story?
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so obviously it's not the same thing, but when the Netflix adaptation of Death Note came
Oh
out,
no,
me and my- no. It gets better. Me and my buddies really wanted to watch it. Okay, so we really tried hard to watching it. So what we did was we connected a laptop to the TV, and we found a version of it recorded straight from the movie theater on the hub. Like straight up on the hub, and we watched this straight from the hub, and then after we were like, this is garbage, and then my friend was like, yeah, that's why it's on the hub, bro.
So
Fair
I'll
enough.
be honest, I was thinking about it the other day, and I was like, should I watch it? Because I should give it. I don't like it. I don't
No,
like
it's
when.
It's
It's not
It's
worth your time.
fucking
It's
awful.
not worth your time.
I know. I'm trying to be.
You should watch it. It's masterpiece.
I'm trying to be like. I should watch it first before I form an opinion. That's what I'm trying to live by.
You
No,
don't have
here's the
to,
thing.
It's bad.
Here's the thing.
Okay.
Charbel, because you are pretty new to this Discord, let me give you a few hints. If it is something that Alex has seen and she blatantly hates it, and if Gabe is openly lying to you, it is fucking awful. Do not waste
Okay.
your
It's not
time.
lying. What?
Yes,
Who
you
said
are.
I'm
That
not
you are
lying?
so
Okay,
fucking lying. I know when you're lying, Gabe.
I will
I am
admit.
an honest man, and you
I
should
will
watch it,
admit-
Charbel. It's a good movie.
I will
I-
admit the
Charbel?
voice acting for the death guy, it was pretty alright.
Ryuk?
That's the only
Okay.
thing.
Ugly. I
He's
don't like the
only
look of
good
him.
part of that movie. But Charbel,
He is a great part of that movie.
You like Death Note. You like all the complexity of it. You like the characters, I'm assuming. That movie takes all of it and just like
Makes it
tears it to
better.
pieces, throws it in like a paper like exterminator thing, like sets everything on
Paper
fire.
shredder. Fuck
puts
that.
it in a paper shredder, sets it on fire, takes the ashes, builds them into an urn, smashes it with
Oh,
a
no.
baseball bat, and then
What
throws it to the
is
bottom
like-
of the ocean. And
No!
then burns up.
That is the
Can
angriest that I've heard Alex been in a long ass time. Take her
Can I
warning.
ask
Take her
one
fucking
So
warning.
bad, it's
Can I
so
ask one thing?
terrible.
The only thing that makes me mad about that movie is that it didn't win the Oscar that year for
Oh my.
best movie.
See?
It should have won.
What other
several
warning do you need?
Oscars.
I have
Hello.
one question, Alex. Is it, from what I see in the trailer, is it an allegory about like school shootings?
No.
What?
I don't
No, it is
think
not.
so.
Oh, fuck. I was
My-
like, what the
my-
fuck are they going on about?
My name is Light. Like my name is
No,
Light
it's-
Yagami. I'm a blonde-haired
no.
white
It's
boy.
not Light Yagami.
Turner. His name is
It's a-
Light Turner.
Light
His
Turner.
name is Light Turner.
My name is
He's-
Light Turner. I'm a white blonde boy who can't get with the most popular girl in school, so therefore
Oh my
I
God.
murder everyone impossible.
Fuck that.
No.
Me-
He barely does any
me-
murdering. Mia does all the murdering because they took Light's personality and gave it to Mia.
Have you ever
Oh,
seen?
did they?
You ever seen the memes where it's like the Chad and the Virgin? There's Virgin Light Turner and Chad like Yagami. Best grades, gets all the
Mhm.
bitches, slaughters half the criminal system.
In the
In
fucking
fucking-
movie, though.
I would like to add Charbel means both genders as bitches. Okay.
Yeah. In the fucking movie too. With that same meme template. It's fucking Virgin. It's Virgin Light Turner Chad Mia. It's not even Misa either. It's not even fucking Misa. It's Mia.
Just Mia.
The
Yeah.
only
If I complain one thing,
It's significantly improved, and you should definitely watch it.
Oh,
You
yeah,
should
no,
watch it and
no.
burn all your copies of original Death Note. And
if you
just
watch
forget
it,
about it.
if you watch it, do it for the memes, but don't
No,
expect to be
the
impressed.
only
by
reason
anything.
You
I
should
don't
watch
want to
it with
lose.
like a little glass of wine in hand. You should
I love
a soup
like-
and,
the cheese.
It's like a movie you should get high to watch, and I say that as someone who will never get
you
high.
should get high to watch
Wait,
it. You should
That's the way
yeah,
to watch that
yeah,
movie.
yeah,
That's the
well-
only way to watch that movie.
William Dafoe was Ryuk.
Yeah, William Dafoe
Yeah.
is real.
Yo, no wonder it
should've
was
won the-
cool.
Man, I don't want to waste 2 hours of my precious life on this
And
planet, though.
to be
not
fair-
a waste. You-
To be
you-
fair,
you-
guys, guys,
to do.
Best 2 hours
guys.
of intellectualism
Fuck.
you will ever
I think I'll
experience.
watch
You
300.
will
I love 300.
you
I'll
will
see-
freeze.
Anyway.
I promise.
Anyway.
My-
Anyway, before we
Anyway,
that
take
is my
up
guarantee.
before we take up 3 hours of the audience's time, like how we already did with Shadow and Bone, let's start wrapping up. So
Okay.
yeah, thanks Charbel for your input on Death Note, and thanks everybody for your case studies. I think when it comes to the episode overall, for everyone listening, I hope you've learned something. I hope you've learned how to, as this is a creative writing podcast, we are, hopefully you can take away something when you decide to write your own characters. And also as a comedy podcast, hopefully you've had a laugh or two. But
bro, I just learned that William Dafoe voiced Ryuk in the Netflix adaptation of Death Note that should have won an Oscar and an Emmy. And
oh my god! And apparently, as an educational podcast in the exact same vein, hopefully you've learned something. But yeah, I think that is pretty much everything that I need to say. I think in terms of sometimes we would give advice on our podcast, but we've pretty much just hopefully you've taken a note or two of what we've been talking about through our case studies or through that initial discussion in part 1. But we are closely approaching 3 hours, and that's hopefully not take any more of your guys' time. So thanks everybody for listening. You can find all of the InkGuild social media down in the description below, both as the InkGuild and individually. We are on numerous social media platforms. So we're on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, even though we don't stream that often anymore. And our home channel is always the InkGuild on YouTube. Please subscribe. We're at 89 subscribers as of this episode, and I'd really like for us to get to 100. But yeah, with all of that being said, thank you to Tyler for joining us again. Charbel, Marcus, you guys are always welcome here. And for everyone listening at home, thank you and have a good night.
Get the fuck out of here.
Drink water, kids.
Night.
Yo, night.